Thank you very much, and welcome to the Committee on Natural Resources. We'll come to order. Oh, we're going to wait a little while. Are we ready to start? Yeah.
Starting the 30-second countdown now.
Got it.
$15 seconds. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3.
Thank you very much, and good morning. The Committee on Natural Resources will come to order. The committee is meeting today to examine the Department of Interior spending priorities and the President's fiscal year 2022 budget proposal. Under Committee Rule 4F, any oral opening statements at the hearing are limited to the chair and the ranking minority member or their designees. This will allow us to hear from our witness sooner and help members keep to their individual schedules. Therefore, I ask unanimous consent that all other members' opening statements be made part of the hearing record if they are submitted to the clerk by 5 p.m. today or at the close of the hearing, whichever comes first. Hearing no objection, so ordered. Without objection, the chair may also declare a recess subject to the call of the chair. As described in the notice, statements, documents, or motion must be submitted to the electronic repository at hnrc.doc at mail.house.gov. Members physically present should provide a hard copy for staff to distribute by email. Additionally, please note that as always, members are responsible for their own microphones as with the fully in-person meetings. Members can be muted by staff only to avoid inadvertent background noise. Pursuant to Committee Rule 3L and the latest guidance from the attending physician, anyone present at the hearing room today must wear a mask covering their mouth and nose if they are not fully vaccinated or if they are uncomfortable with informing us of their vaccination status. It is my hope with everyone's cooperation we could protect the safety of members, the staff, and their respective families as they return home. The committee has masks available for any member who needs one. Finally, members or witnesses experience technical problems should inform the committee staff immediately. I also want to take time to welcome our new member, Melanie Stansberry. She will be joining us. She comes to Congress. She represents the District Number 1 in New Mexico, retaining the seat formerly held by our guest, Secretary Haaland. Her background and expertise on the committee is going to be very useful, and we look forward to her contributions. I also want to take time to thank Representative Matsui for her contribution to the committee as she released her position to accommodate our new member, and we're very grateful and want to thank her for her courtesy and her gesture. Good morning, and let me recognize myself for my opening statement. Good morning, Madam Secretary. I'm happy to welcome you to this morning's hearing. I want to thank you for wasting no time in improving our nation's conservation and Native American policies, which I'm sure we're going to hear more about today. This may feel like a homecoming for you since you were the vice chair of this committee, and here you are on the other side of this table as one of the first Native Americans in a cabinet position and the first Native woman in that position. It's a pleasure to see you again and inviting you to testify. Knowing the committee as you do, Madam Secretary, you realize that the goal is a deliberate and informative hearing without too much theatrics. That's the goal. But as you know, this committee, the process sometimes doesn't quite work out that way. And we have a lot to talk about, and I'm sure you're well aware of many questions we have, but if you'll indulge me, and just for a moment, I want to recognize the history that we're making today. In 1789, Congress created 3 executive departments: Foreign Affairs, Treasury, and War Department. Given our country's history and its early relationship with tribes and indigenous people, these issues were initially housed in the War Department because the United States viewed tribes and indigenous communities as pure adversaries. In 1849, Congress created the Department of Interior to oversee internal affairs such as water, wilderness, regulation of territories, public lands, and Native Americans. Since then, the Department of Interior has made contributions to our nation's history, but the intent of placing Indian Affairs in the Department of Interior was to dismantle indigenous culture while re-educating Native Americans so they could become respectable citizens, quote unquote. Yet here we are, decades after inviting the first Native American woman elected to Congress and the first Native American cabinet member to hear about her plans for the Department of Interior. The historic significance of this moment should not be lost. A department that was once in charge of eradicating the indigenous culture of this country is finally being led by one. Secretary Haaland sits before us today despite the history of this department, and I welcome her to this hearing room with the utmost respect and appreciation for the work she has done and will continue to do for people. Today, we'll hear about the most significant issues facing our country, such as climate change, environmental justice, and polluter accountability. I supported Secretary Haaland's nomination because we need someone with her experience, her compassion, her intelligence, and fair-mindedness in charge of answering these questions. As I can say from personal experience, Secretary Haaland brings a new perspective to her work. The attributes that qualify her as Secretary of Interior, compassion, experience, intelligence, and fair-mindedness is precisely what our country needs at this moment in time. And we welcome her leadership and look forward to that leadership. And with that, I'd like once again welcome you here, Secretary Haaland, back to this committee, and now recognize the ranking member, Mr. Westerman, for his opening comments. Sir?
Thank you, Chairman Grijalva. It's indeed great to be here today. It's good to see you, not only to see you, but to see you in person and in 3D. This is a good day when we're finally back in the committee room. It feels more like what Congress should be, where we're looking across the dais at one another, where we're here in person to discuss important issues for the country. And I'm so thankful that we're able to be back here today. Thankful for the great work that our country did in coming up with vaccines and getting those vaccines available. Everybody has access to it, and hopefully this is just the beginning, that all of our hearings and especially our markups will
Audio, sir.
throughout your tenure. Committee Republicans are focused on access, conservation, innovation, and transparency, all of which should be a bipartisan and priority. Unfortunately, the administration's proposed budget, I believe, and I think we will have a discussion about it today, falls short of many of these goals. If there's one thing that we should all be united on, and that is access. And it doesn't just mean access to recreational opportunities, but also access to timber, water, lands for grazing, energy, minerals, and much more. The administration has taken unprecedented steps to cut off access to critical minerals and vital energy sources, putting Americans out of work and jeopardizing our energy security. The budget request does nothing to reverse this tide and instead includes deeply flawed logical inconsistencies. For example, this administration canceled the Keystone XL pipeline permit, yet it supports foreign pipelines like Nord Stream 2, making us and our allies more dependent on Russia. Additionally, the budget focuses heavily on promoting renewable energy, but says virtually nothing about domestically sourcing the minerals needed to support solar and wind energy. Finally, the administration also fully funded the Land and Water Conservation Fund and other conservation programs while simultaneously cutting off those revenue sources by halting fossil fuel development. Instead of a misguided preservationist land designation, we must promote access through true conservation. This is more critical than ever, as over 75% of our western lands are currently classified as being in severe drought or worse, an ominous sign for what will surely be another catastrophic wildfire season. Unfortunately, this is nothing new. Last year was yet another historic wildfire season that burned 10.3 million acres, and 20% of that was on DOI lands. This budget includes no serious support for long-term water storage and does nothing to help us dramatically ramp up the acres in need of treatment to prevent wildfires. Two things that are desperately needed right now: drought, wildfire, and the litany of other crises facing the department will require innovative approaches to solve. I have no doubt that America is up for the challenge, but sadly, instead of incentivizing new ideas, this budget simply throws money at problems and uses catchphrases, oftentimes with little to no meaning. Finally, I'm deeply disappointed with what this administration is passing off as transparency. Not only was this budget released months behind schedule and on the Friday before a long weekend, a date I believe was chosen in the hopes that nobody would really notice the budget's release, but DOI has also ignored 87 documents requests and failed to provide 2 requested policy briefings to the committee. Secretary Haaland, as a former member of this very committee, I know you understand how important it is to be responsive to congressional oversight inquiries, so I hope you will implore your staff at the department to take these duties more seriously and to respond to all of our outstanding requests. I know many of us on both sides of the aisle share the common goal of wanting to see our environment and our natural resources thrive for years to come. Unfortunately, I believe we're just simply paying lip service to conservation while actively making it more difficult for us to be good stewards and to take care of our resources and use them wisely. Again, I would like to thank Secretary Haaland for being here today. It means a lot that you would come over and visit with the committee. And Mr. Chairman, I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you, Mr. West. Thank you, Mr. Westerman, and I want to thank again our witness today, Secretary of Interior, Deb Haaland. Thank you very much for taking the time. Madam Secretary, I won't go through I think you're pretty familiar with all the 5-minute rules and all that, so rather than repeat that whole section of what I have to say, the assumption is you know, and I think that assumption is correct. Now, the chair recognizes Secretary Haaland to testify. Madam Secretary, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Chairman, Ranking Member. It's an honor to be here and to see all these familiar faces. Really happy to be here with you today. Very quickly, I want to let you know that I'm joined by Ms. Rachel Taylor, Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary for Policy Management and Budget. She is here with me today to sort of help make sure that you get the information that you need in full. Chairman Grijalva, Ranking Member Westerman, members of the committee, it's an honor to be here with you today on behalf of the Department of the Interior. I was proud to serve on this committee, and it's great to be back with so many friends and colleagues. It's deeply meaningful to me as the first Native American Cabinet Secretary to be here on the ancestral homelands of the Anacostan and Piscataway people speaking before you. This committee plays an important role in the success of the Department of the Interior and our many programs. The work that Congress has done on a bipartisan basis to support priorities such as the Great American Outdoors Act, wildland fire, and tribal programs has been integral to the ability of the Interior to meet our mission, and it has had profound impacts on the lives of Native Americans and Alaska Natives in communities across our country. And in that spirit, I come before you today to present the fiscal year 2022 budget and to talk about how we can work together to ensure the department is ready to meet this moment. The 2022 budget reflects the important role Interior will play to accomplish the administration's goals to move our country forward in this unprecedented time. The President's budget responds by proposing $17.6 billion in discretionary investments in Interior, as well as legislative proposals to implement the American Jobs Plan. The programs you see reflected in the budget request lift up the President's goals of addressing the climate crisis, providing much-needed resources to tribal nations, restoring balance on public lands and waters, advancing equity and environmental justice, investing in a clean energy future, and creating good-paying jobs. I will walk through a few high-level details now, and of course, look forward to having a discussion with you later on. First, the budget supports conservation partnership programs that will advance the America the Beautiful initiative, our administration's effort to conserve 30% of U.S. lands and waters by 2030 through locally led and voluntary projects. The request also allocates the full mandatory funding for the Land and Water Conservation Fund, a program I care deeply about as a member of Congress and am thrilled to help direct as Secretary. And it includes $86 million for the Civilian Climate Corps initiative. All told, the budget includes unprecedented investments to address the climate crisis, including more than $1.9 billion in new funding toward conservation, clean energy, climate science, and fleet modernization. There is an increase of $133 million to accelerate and expand activities that support clean energy deployment across federal lands and waters. It includes more than $300 million to support fuels management activities to reduce the risk of wildland fire, funds to help prevent wildfires from taking hold, growing in severity, and threatening communities and resources. The budget request prioritizes investments in science, including $200 million in new funds that will help to understand climate impacts and make better decisions about how to mitigate, adapt, and increase resilience across the landscape in our communities. It also provides $300 million to support the President's Reclamation Jobs initiative and clean up legacy pollution by plugging orphan oil and gas wells and cleaning up abandoned mines. It includes major investments in Indian country. The budget includes $4.2 billion across all Indian Affairs programs, which is $278 million above fiscal year 2021. We are also focused on strengthening tribal sovereignty, including a proposal for $150 million to reestablish the Indian Land Consolidation Program within the Bureau of Indian Affairs. This request also includes important increases for tribal public safety and justice programs, including a $16.5 million for programs like Interior's Missing and Murdered Unit that address the missing and murdered Indigenous peoples crisis. We want to put the full weight of the federal government into investigating these cases and marshal law enforcement resources across the cabinet and throughout Indian country. Finally, to ensure our nation's legal obligations to tribes are fully met, the budget proposes to shift funding for tribal water settlements, contract support costs, and tribal lease payments to mandatory spending starting in fiscal year 2023. These are just some of the highlights of this budget request. I look forward to working with the committee to achieve these important goals. I commit to you that I will continue to honor and respect the role this committee plays with the confident expectation that working together, we can accomplish great things on behalf of the American people. This concludes my opening remarks. Thank you again for having me, and I look forward to your questions. I yield, Chairman.
Thank you very much. I want to thank you again, Madam Secretary, and now for your testimony, and the members will now have an opportunity to ask questions. I'm going to begin by recognizing, in order of seniority, Ms. Napolitano, if she's available and has any questions. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
There we go. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madam Secretary, it's great to see you, and congratulations again But my whole premise of recycled water is we have in 2016 water recycling project. You go from 63 million to 4.5 million, and 60, and in the water smart 55 million to 15 million. Understand we have over 400, almost 500 million in line already approved projects to be approved, but to be funded. Somehow we are not looking at recycling as a way of combating drought. But in the West, even Arizona, New Mexico, California, Nevada are sadly in need of funds to be able to increase their water supply by recycling. It increased investment in 16 would advance dozens of water recycling projects. Like I said, they're already approved feasibility studies, simply waiting for federal funding for the share. And how much demand are you seeing from water districts for Title 16 grants currently? And are the current funding levels sufficient to meet the current demand? As you know, the Colorado River Basin has been in drought for more than 2 decades with no end in sight. The stakeholders are working to advance new drought-proof water supply to help respond to the challenges. It includes a proposal for a regional recycled water project led by Metropolitan Water District of Southern California in collaboration with other states that would generate enough water for 500,000 families. Can you tell the committee where the department will help advance regional drought projects like these to help bolster water security for communities across the Colorado River? I don't understand why the drop. It should be increased. I requested 500 million to be added to Title 16. I understand Mr. Huffman and Chairman Grijalva look more at 750 million because there is such demand. And there's a new move to issue with regional programs. I don't know whether you can answer it right offhand, but I would like to be in touch with you to see how we can work this out. It's just not enough. And doing the diminishing of the budget for that really harms America's, the 17 Western states' ability to combat drought. Could you answer any questions?
Congresswoman, thank you so much for the question. And I want you to know that we understand how severe the drought is in the West. We care about it deeply. We work on it every single day. And the programs that we have in place, we absolutely want to support. We feel that there are many tools we can use, and we're going to do our best to use every single tool. I'd love to give Rachel an opportunity just to go into a few more details about Title 16 and the Water Smart program.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Secretary, and thank you, Congresswoman, for the question on this. As the Secretary said, we are mindful, especially in the grip of such a historic drought, that all tools need to be used in the toolbox. With respect to your question on the Title 16 funding, we'll be happy to follow up with your office regarding the demand for applications and have a longer conversation with that. I would note that the President's budget request includes, as part of the jobs plan, $2.5 billion for Western water resilience, and so water recycling and reuse projects have been called out specifically. I know that plan is still, the details are still being worked out, and that's something that I fully intend to work with the committee and work with you all on.
That is just minimal of funding. The funding that is required because of what's already approved is way beyond that. And I would like to have a conversation with you on that because it affects not only California, Nevada, and New Mexico, and Arizona, and the Colorado River is at an all-time drought and getting worse. It is critical. It is very imperative that we take steps to be able to fund programs that will help with the water resiliency in many of those areas. And I look forward to it, to work with you, Ms. Secretary. Thank you very much, and I yield back.
Gentlelady yields. Let me recognize the ranking member. Mr. Westerman, you're recognized, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Haaland, probably a little-known fact by most Americans is that 40% of the land along the southern border is federal land that falls under the management of DOI. This year, already, there's been 105,000 pounds of methamphetamine seized and an astonishing nearly 6,500 pounds of fentanyl. That's enough lethal doses of fentanyl to kill 1.4 billion people. You know, almost four times the population of the United States. My first question is, what is the administration's plan to ensure that DOI's lands on our southern border are protected, and why didn't the department budget request any money specifically for this purpose?
Ranking Member, thank you so much for the question. And with respect to any of those budget requests, of course, we are always going to be happy to meet with you and give you any details that you like. But if Rachel has something to add there, I would appreciate it.
Yeah, I'd be happy to follow up on the numbers. I mean, I think we're taking a look at the manpower issues and also the environmental issues that are related to the border. So I'd be happy to follow up with you on that one.
Yeah, and I would be interested in following up, and especially talking about the environmental issues on public lands where illegal traffic's going across. Just as another part of that, according to the DEA, Mexican traffickers are the principal suppliers of most illicit drugs on reservations in Indian country. A few weeks ago, I had the opportunity to travel in the Southwest and visit with a lot of tribal leaders, and unprompted, every place I stopped, they talked about the problem with illegal drugs on their tribal lands. So as this border crisis allows for more dangerous drugs to flow into our country, how will you work specifically to combat the flow of illicit drugs on tribal lands?
Thank you very much, Ranking Member. So one thing I can say is that the President essentially wants to use an all-of-government approach for many of the issues that cross our departments. And of course, the Department of the Interior is one department that might deal with issues of that nature, but there are others as well. I would like to honestly get together with other members of the cabinet to discuss the issue, and we would be happy to revisit this issue with you.
Thank you, Secretary. The administration's budget supports the 30 by 30, which is based on a similar global initiative. In April of this year, 245 non-governmental organizations signed a letter criticizing the global 30 by 30 initiative over concerns that it could displace up to 300 million indigenous peoples and lead to serious human rights abuses by conservation organizations and enforcement agencies. How can this administration claim to support indigenous peoples at home when one of your main priorities is based on a global initiative that has sparked serious human rights issues and concerns over indigenous peoples around the world?
Thank you so much, Ranking Member. The America the Beautiful initiative is we're looking at it as a collaborative effort. We feel it's one that can bring our country together, that can unite us in a conservation effort that would actually invite tribes. President Biden has made it a priority of his administration to ensure that we have robust tribal consultation across the government. We intend to make sure that we carry that out. We have already spoken with many tribes and stakeholders regarding the America the Beautiful initiative, and in that spirit, the collaborative spirit, we will move forward with it. And I thank you for your concerns, and of course, we'll look at all the issues with respect to this initiative and make sure we're informed as we move forward.
Thank you, Secretary. I know from previous service with you on this committee that justice for indigenous people is very important to you. We are currently investigating the World Wildlife Fund for potentially using federal grants for eco guards who raped, murdered, and forced indigenous peoples from their homes in the name of conservation efforts like 30 by 30. DOI's budget provides an additional $6 million for the Fish and Wildlife Service's International Affairs Division, which has been at the center of this controversy. Why are we using taxpayer money to fund organizations with serious human rights abuses? And will you commit to continuing the Trump administration's freeze on that grant funding to organizations like WWF with histories of such abuse?
Thank you, Ranking Member. I can guarantee you that all of these grants and so forth, they undergo very stringent reviews, and I will take your comment and your concern back to the department and make sure that they will look at that.
Thank you again, Madam Secretary. I'm out of time. I've got more questions I'll submit in writing. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields. Let me recognize Congressman Costa for his questions. Sir, you're recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Madam Secretary, we are so proud that one of our own members from this committee would be chosen to be the Secretary of the Department of Interior, and the President fitting and appropriate that the first Native American to serve in this very important position. And I, for one, I know will be looking forward to continuing to work with you in this important partnership. I want to talk about drought in California and western states, and also a bit about the fire issues with our park and forests, and coordination between your efforts and the United States Department of Agriculture that has a large responsibility on forest management. I don't have to tell you, we've got extreme drought conditions in the West. In California, we think it's, and we're not, with climate change, obviously, they're increasing with the intensity. This may be the worst drought since 1977, 78. Yet there are more demands on California's water system, and I would say for the West, the Colorado River and others, than ever before in our history. And therefore, we've got to work together. The governor has proposed a $5.2 billion drought resistance plan to help the state in a host of different areas. I know this budget that you're talking about here today was proposed earlier. Things have only gotten worse since this budget. I would urge you to take another look at it. Frankly, I agree with my colleague, Grace Napolitano, in Water Smart and a host of these areas. We need to plus them up. We in Congress, I'm going to do everything I can to do just that in some of our infrastructure packages. One of the areas that's very important in this funding effort is also, though, trying to balance transfers when they can in our water system. We're looking at some opportunities in July. We just had an important water workshop, bipartisan state and federal officials. Ernest Conad was representing the department. I asked you earlier, but I want you to urge every bit of creativity and thinking out of the box when we have a window of opportunities to transfer molecules of water that are so much needed. We have some of our farm communities that we're going to have literally hundreds and thousands of acres of land fallowed, maybe 1 million or more. That results in unemployment to farm communities and campesinos, farm workers, of 40 to 50% in the last severe drought we had in 2008 and 2010. Those are communities and people hurting. Do you care to respond?
Thank you so much, Congressman. And I share a deep concern with you about the drought. It's an issue that that we work on every single day. There are members of my senior staff who are on this issue.
By the way, I'm glad that Tanya and Camelia, who have working relationships with all of us, have been now are part of your team, or will be.
Yes. And so, I mean, I just want you to know that it's important to us. And we are taking, there again, an all-of-government approach to this issue. As we mentioned, the $2.5 billion for Western water resilience, we're happy to work with you on that number and would, of course, welcome anything.
Right, on that point, we've got an effort that I think we have bipartisan support for the restoration of the Friant-Kern Canal, the Delta-Mendota Canal, and the California Aqueduct. The governor's got money in his budget, and we're looking at that as a part of our effort. Dam safety is also a critical area, and I want to revisit that with you. Let me move quickly because time's elapsed here. I toured Yosemite National Park. I know you're plussing up our national park system, and I understand you've had conversations with Secretary Vilsack. But the horrific fires we've had in the West are so devastating in all of our districts. I suggested that there's a joint role and responsibility between Interior and USDA with Forest Service. Are you working together to update the forest management plan? Because it not only affects our forests, but our national parks as well. And the maintenance is needed. The superintendent, Cicely Muldoon, great superintendent, gave me a 3-hour tour of all the updates that are needed in Yosemite, and that's just but one of our crown jewels of our national parks.
Thank you so much. Yes, Secretary Vilsack and I meet regularly regarding this issue, and I am happy to ensure that I take your concerns back to him.
More to be continued. Run out of time, not questions, but we need to work together and look forward to doing just that. Thank you.
Congressman, thank you.
Gentleman yields, and I believe the Mr. Gomer is recognized for his time. Go to Lambert. Okay. Mr. Lambert?
Okay,
Sir,
thank you,
you're
Mr. Chairman.
recognized. Thank you.
Thank you. And Madam Secretary, it's good to see you. I remember you used to sit right over there not that long ago. So now you have a different seat, a little more power perhaps. But I'm going to just jump right in because of limited time. There's this comprehensive review that's going on for oil and gas leasing on federal lands. Thank goodness a federal judge has issued a temporary restraining order against that because of all the jobs and energy that would be hurt because of that ban. But is this going to result in a permanent ban on federal lands of oil and gas production when this review is completed?
Thank you so much, Congressman, and it's nice to see you as well. Thank you for welcoming me here. The pause on oil leases, as you know, it was for new leases. There's still millions of acres that are open and thousands of permits that are actually working right now. The decision of the court is under review in the solicitor's office. They're working with the Department of Justice as well to review that decision. Of course, we will abide by any decision that we are ordered to, and we will be happy to be in touch with you as to next steps. But I just want to make sure you know that the pause is on new leases, not existing leases or permits.
But do you anticipate a permanent ban of production for new leases when the review is done?
As I have said many times, gas and oil production will continue well into the future, and we believe that is the reality of our economy and the world we're living in.
Does that mean you would favor new production in the future?
I have always said that I am going to absolutely follow the law. We're going to make sure that the reason for the review, of course, we want to make sure that taxpayers, American taxpayers, are getting a good return on essentially their investment.
Now, with that in mind, about $10 billion comes in to the federal government from oil and gas leases currently, and a lot of that is used for like the national park backlog and conservation efforts and other really good incentives, and the rest goes into the Treasury. How are we going to replace $10 billion if there is a permanent ban, which you're sort of in doubt about?
No, I don't think there is a plan right now for a permanent ban, Congressman, but as I said, the review will come out early summer, and we will assess the gas and the fossil fuel programs at that time. And of course, we are happy to talk with you further. If you have any questions, you're welcome to give us a call, and we're happy to make sure that that we're approaching it in a transparent manner.
Now, when it comes to mining, I'm really concerned because we need to have continued production of lithium and rare minerals in the future, if nothing else for electric vehicles, plus computers, cell phones, and everything else that we use these important substances for. And yet, mining has such a hard time getting established in the U.S. under current environmental and Department of Interior regulations. It takes 10 or 12 years to open a mine. So how can we meet the need for lithium and critical and rare earth minerals when it takes so long to do mining in the United States?
Thank you for the question, Congressman. And yes, we understand that critical minerals are important to the future of our technology, and President Biden, of course, believes in energy independence. I think that the United States and the Department of the Interior want to make sure that any mining that's done takes into consideration the environment. We have to make sure that we're doing things with respect to the environment, that workers are protected in mines and so forth. And so I am fortunate to work alongside a tremendous number of USGS scientists who understand this issue very well.
Okay, thank you for your answer. Let me just conclude by saying I hope we don't have to rely on other countries like China that have horrible environmental policies. They're dirty, they pollute. Let's have some U.S. production, and we can't just rely on recycling. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Gentleman yields. Let me recognize Representative Sablan. Sir, you're recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Madam Secretary, welcome back to the House, and congratulations on your being selected and confirmed as Secretary of Interior. Thank you also for your public support of UNDRIP, the United Nations Declaration on Rights of Indigenous People. That was awesome. And also, Madam Secretary, I'd like to work with you since your department, your Office of Insular Affairs, is sort of supposed to be our greatest advocacy in the administration for the insular areas, the territories like my district, the Northern Marianas. And Madam Secretary, as you know, responding to climate change is a priority of this committee, and is especially important to my constituents in the Northern Mariana Islands who are on the front line of the negative impacts of climate change. So I congratulate the President and your department for almost doubling to $15 million funding for the Energizing Insular Communities program in your department's budget. Congress has been plussing up this line item for the last several years. I am not convinced the department has been using this money as effectively as it could, however. In 2014, former Congressman Donna Christensen's legislation mandating the Interior create energy action plans for all the insular areas was enacted, Public Law 113-235. But the department has not used the Energizing Insular Communities funding to implement that law. There are supposed to be energy action plans for each insular area and to reduce reliance on imported fossil fuels, develop domestic sources like wind and solar, which we have in abundance, and to improve the efficiency of the infrastructure. The plans are supposed to include both engineering and financing guidelines for implementing and sustaining these improvements, and a timeline for putting the plans to work with specific project milestones. And lastly, and this is particularly important, Madam Secretary, this is not work that the Interior Department throws to the insular governments that says, good luck, it's up to you. No, this is work that the Interior Department is supposed to lead federal agencies in getting done. Obviously, we'll have to work with its insular government, but the law puts the burden on the Department of Interior. Now, I'm very heartened to see that President Biden seems serious about the Energizing Insular Communities program and is doubling funding for that. So, Madam Secretary, if I may ask, may I have your commitment to implement Public Law 113-235 and create these energy action plans for each insular area?
Mr. Sablan, thank you so much for the question, and I want you to know that that your community is extremely important to me and to all of us, and I am absolutely going to take all of your concerns and comments back to the office. I know you must know Nick Pula quite well. I will make sure that he knows and understands. We're going to make sure that we're moving this forward, and I thank you for the question.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you for, yes, I do know Mr. Pula, and we've been encouraging the office to comply with the law, and the law also requires that, that the department provide annual reports to Congress on the implementations of the law. So, Madam Secretary, respectfully, I must also ask that could we have your commitment that you will be making those annual reports to Congress on the implementation of that law?
Yes, thank you, Congressman.
All right, thank you. And the law also requires you to create teams of technical, policy, and financial experts to assist each of the insular areas in developing and implementing their respective plans. May I also have your commitment, Madam Secretary, that you provide this committee with the names of the experts for the team for each insular area so we can be assured that the planning and implementation is in good hands?
We will follow. We'll
you.
follow the law. We'll follow the policies. We'll make sure you get what you need.
Thank you. And
Congressman. Thank
if
you.
I may, Madam Secretary, I'd like for you to know that you have an open standing invitation to come visit the Northern Marianas. And finally, Madam Secretary, I know it's not the jurisdiction of this committee, but I was sort of heartened to see that there's some money that's indicated or identified in the President's budget that is meant to maintain and improve the conditions of Bureau of Indian Education schools in Indian country, which is really sorely needed. But thank you for that also. And Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Would gentleman yield for a question? Quick. When's the last time a Secretary of Interior visited the Northern Marianas, Mr. Sablan?
Not in the 13 years I've been here, but it's been a while. It's been a while, Madam Secretary.
With that, gentleman yields, and I believe Mr. McClintock is, sir, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madam Secretary, after considering some 6,500 public comments, the Trump administration issued a final supplemental environmental impact statement to raise Shasta Dam by 18.5 feet. This long overdue proposal would store enough water to support more than 3 million Californians annually, allowing for storage in wet years so that we have it in dry ones like the one we're currently suffering. Would you commit to moving forward with the Shasta Dam raise?
Thank you very much. I will have to take that question back to the department, and my staff will be in touch with you and your office, sir.
As you know, it is desperately needed. We had record rainfall a few years ago, and we had to open the dams and release that water because we had no place to store it. The Shasta was designed to be 800 feet of elevation. It's currently 600 feet. So this raise is about 700,000 acre-feet of water, and it's been languishing for many, many decades now.
Thank you.
In fact, your budget request includes no funding for new water storage capacity, despite the severe drought conditions that we're suffering in the West. I wonder how can the administration expect to address our Western water crisis without proposing any funding for long-term water storage?
Congressman, thank you so much. Water storage is absolutely one of the tools that we are looking at with respect to water conditions and drought in the West, and I appreciate you raising that, and very happy to follow up with you on that specific issue.
Okay, I've just raised two critical questions for the people of the Western United States, and I've gotten answers to neither of those questions, and they are simple and fundamental to the responsibilities of this government. Let me try a third time. Earlier this year, more than 200 Western water, agriculture, and urban organizations sent a letter to Congress and to the White House requesting an all-of-the-above approach to funding Western water infrastructure to be included in any infrastructure stimulus package. The reclamation provisions of the WIN Act expire this year. Do you support WIN Act reauthorization?
Yes, the WIN Act has been very helpful to many communities.
So the administration will support its full reauthorization?
Let's see. We're working to send recommendations to the Energy and Water Subcommittee pursuant to the 2016 WIN Act to allocate funding for water storage, desalinization, and water recycling.
All right, thank you. I've heard from a number of constituents who are upset with the reservation system for Yosemite National Park. The National Park Service is requiring reservations to enter the park through September 30th, citing COVID, despite the fact that California is now fully reopened and the science demonstrates that COVID does not spread outdoors. Will you commit to ending the reservation system and restoring full public access to the park?
I appreciate the question. Of course, we would certainly, I feel it's my duty to make sure we're consulting with folks on the ground, and certainly we would talk to the superintendent of that park and be happy to have the conversation.
Well,
with
these restrictions
NPS
continue to have
overall.
devastating impact on the gateway communities that depend upon tourist travel to Yosemite for their very economic existence.
Yes, thank you.
One of the goals that we set in the majority was to restore the federal government as a good neighbor to the communities that are directly impacted by the federal lands. Consulting the superintendent is not consulting the communities. I will assure you the communities are in desperate need of lifting these restrictions, which have no foundation at all in science.
Well, Congressman, if I may, I am pleased overall with President Biden's work to help make sure that our country is getting vaccinated, and I know that things are definitely
but that has nothing to
opening
do with the science that has clearly shown that COVID very, very rarely spreads outdoors. In fact, by ordering people indoors, I think that the government made a huge mistake. But we can discuss that later. One more question. You claim to prioritize wildland fire risk, but earlier this year, the administration endorsed the Protecting America's Wilderness and Public Lands Act, which would add 1.5 million new acres of wilderness. Over the past 10 years, nearly 7 million acres of wilderness and wilderness study areas have burned in catastrophic wildfires and may jump into other federal, state, and private lands where they cause even more destruction. I wonder, how can this administration claim to be serious about wildland fire management when you're endorsing policies that tie the hands of federal land managers and prevent necessary treatments of our public lands that are so desperately needed?
On Mr. McClintock's last question, the time is up. If you wish to answer it or send the question to the committee in a response in writing, that would be appropriate as well.
Thank you so much. I appreciate very much your questions, and we will absolutely respond in writing. Thank you.
Thank you. Gentleman yields. Mr. Huffman, sir, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Madam Secretary, it is a great honor and a pleasure to address you as our new Secretary of Interior. Thank you and welcome back. One of the most important things I think that you and your colleagues in this administration have done is to thoughtfully reconsider and in some cases reverse ill-conceived policies of the last administration. And this certainly includes the decision to suspend the oil leases in the Arctic Refuge, which were rushed through during the waning days of the last administration. These leases were announced just minutes before the mob of Trump supporters stormed the Capitol on January 6th. They are of dubious legality. They're a terrible idea policy-wise. They're deeply unpopular, and I applaud you for suspending them. I urge the department to take the next step and to throw them out entirely so that we can keep working on permanent protection of that very unique and pristine place, the coastal plain of the Arctic Refuge. We've already talked a bit about climate impacts here this morning, and in my district and in California, of course, we're feeling some of the worst of these impacts with wildfires and drought. The concerns that my colleague Jim Costa raised about the very real hardship that farmers are feeling in the Central Valley are real. But there's also other interests at stake with this drought, and I thank you for engaging with me on the critical conditions in the Klamath Basin, because we have tribes, we have fishermen, we have ecosystems, all of them are suffering. But you wouldn't necessarily know that there are all these other stakeholders and interests by looking at the previous administration, because your predecessor always had his thumb on the scale for his former lobbying clients. And I am so glad that after a century of giving a free pass to the fossil fuel industry and others, and a revolving door of special interests, that this administration is taking a new approach. One thing I want to suggest is, in agreement with what a couple of my colleagues have already suggested, this drought, I think, does merit reconsideration of some of the budget amounts for Title 16 and Water Smart. Given the severity of this drought, Water Smart in particular, water conservation is the fastest way we can bring water and better water management online. It is decades faster than any type of new dam someone might propose to build. It's cost effective, it's got local matching funds, and it really makes a difference quite quickly in drought-stricken communities. So to see that line item actually decrease in the budget was troubling for many of us, and I hope you'll continue to work with Congress to find an appropriate level of support for that critical program. I'm also glad that we're talking about more than just the Band-Aids, the triage from these various climate impacts, that you and your colleagues in this administration are looking upstream at the drivers of these climate impacts. And in that regard, I want to thank you for something that you've already been criticized about this morning by my colleagues across the aisle. This is a moment that, of course, compels us to reconsider the century of impunity that the fossil fuel industry has had with respect to our public lands. And the fact that you have put a pause on federal oil and gas leasing is entirely appropriate. But a lot of the sky is falling doom and gloom that we're hearing from fossil fuel interests about this, I think, is misplaced. And so I want to ask you about all of the stockpiled permits and leases that are out there, even in the face of this pause, that are going to continue potentially to move forward. This is not as if someone just flipped a switch and shut off oil and gas development on public lands. Could you speak to that and the fact that, as I understand it, companies already have access to over 26 million acres of land, and the current leasing pause does not affect existing oil and gas production or all of those stockpiled leases and permits?
Thank you, Congressman. And yes, there is a large millions of acres of leased land. Also, over 8,000 approved drilling permits currently that are waiting to be used. And so we recognize that the oil and gas production continues, even in the face of the pause on new leases.
I appreciate that. I understand that a judge has put a temporary pause on that moratorium, and in light of that and just the disruption that nationwide injunctions have when people do this kind of forum shopping and manage to secure a nationwide injunction, I want to urge you to communicate to President Biden the necessity of declaring a climate emergency, which would bolster his authority in the face of those type of legal challenges, and I think is entirely appropriate if we're serious about this crisis. And of course, I invite you to come and visit my district, where we need to talk about many natural resource issues, but I also am glad that you brought up the issue of missing and murdered Indigenous women, because it's an acute issue in my district, and we'd love the chance to host you and talk about that. Thank you, Madam Secretary, and I yield back.
Thank you. Thank you.
And I believe that Mr. Gosar is recognized. Sir?
Yes, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, you're heard.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Madam Secretary. Welcome back to the committee. In your budget, you have a significant amount of money for tribal water settlements, which I think is important for us to settle many of these outstanding water commitments, particularly as the West faces what could be an epic shortfall of water. The tragic closing of a Navajo generating station in northern Arizona has deeply hurt the region and the people that depended on the revenues for this decision. One challenging decision we will have to have from this event is the redesignation of water left behind with the closure of NGS. The NGS closure leaves behind the potential redesignation of 34,100 acre-feet of water, more than 11 billion gallons, for other uses each year from the Colorado River. This water is an opportunity for the region to both settle old tribal water agreements, but also create new opportunities in the region. While Arizona is entitled to use this portion of the Colorado River's flow, it is important that we work to keep the water in the region to ensure that we have job creation and settle other challenges to the river. It is unfortunate that this decision will have to come at a time when the Colorado River is in such deep drought conditions. However, you are still facing this challenge. While I know that you will receive significant pressure from the environmental groups to return the water to the river flow or for other entities who think they can take this water from Arizona for their own use, I hope that you will work with me and the delegation to ensure that the water stays in Arizona and in the region to solve the problems, and to coordinate with the EPA to solve the subsurface cleaning up of the area. Madam Secretary, would you commit to working with us to keep the water from NGS in the northern Arizona region to solve local community and regional problems, settle historic tribal water needs, and to ensure that the damage done by the closure of NGS is mitigated by keeping the water in the region?
I appreciate the question very much, Congressman, and it's nice to see you as well. We're happy to work with you, and happy to have our office reach out to your office and make sure that we are speaking on this issue. And I appreciate knowing your position on it.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Now, I'd like to turn to another issue facing the Navajo Nation. As we heard at our hearing last week, the Navajo Nation is in the process of moving to advance the development of significant helium resources on the Navajo Nation. As you know, the Bureau of Land Management, as directed by Congress, is closing the National Helium Reserve this year and preparing to sell off that asset. This closure means our nation will need more helium resources, especially considering that our helium is on our national critical minerals list. One area that will be a critical challenge is the importance of the nation being able to move forward with their development in a timely fashion. As you know, drilling permits processed by the BLM and the Bureau of Indian Affairs are not often processed in a timely fashion and often can create conflicts between the two agencies. However, this development by the nation will be more successful if they can proceed in a timely manner to correspond with the new market opportunities created by the closure of the BLM reserve and to get that project up and running effectively. Finally, we know that the Russian Federation is working to develop their own helium resources to compete, and we cannot delay our domestic development, then watch Russia speed their own development up and harm our efforts. Therefore, would you work with me and the Navajo Nation when they come to ensure that the permits that they will need will be processed in a timely fashion, and that the historic bickering between the agencies that has slowed permitting in the past is limited to ensure that the Navajo Nation can develop their own resources, create jobs, and provide a critical resource to the Arizona and American economy?
Thank you, Congressman, for the question. First, I'll say what I mentioned before. President Biden believes in energy independence, of course. We are working toward that. And also, tribal consultation is a priority of this administration. So we will absolutely ensure that we are consulting with the Navajo Nation on any of the issues that they would like to consult on. And of course, we're happy to continue to reach out to your office as well.
Yeah, it's very important that the coordination, to be streamlined. I know that, on the west side, the Colorado Indian tribe had problems with water mitigation and even wanted to leave the Indian services and go to the Bureau of Reclamation. So if it all could be established to streamline that process, it would be worked out fabulously.
Thank you so much, Congressman.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you. I believe that Mr. Lowenthal, Congressman, you're recognized for 5 minutes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Secretary Haaland. Thank you for being here with us today. We miss you in the House of Representatives, even though you see this background. I am not really at the beach. And we all miss you here on the committee, and I will always treasure when our committee took our field trip to Chaco Canyon with you. But I'd like to talk about a couple of issues. One is offshore wind, and the second one is the Migratory Bird Treaty Act. As far as offshore wind, I'd like to ask about offshore wind development off the coast of California. The Department of Interior has made significant progress in the past few months on offshore wind, including some important breakthroughs on the West Coast. What are some of the unique challenges on the West Coast, and how is the department working with stakeholders to overcome them? I know you're working closely with the Department of Defense, for example, but I know that there are other areas where you're also engaging. What are the next steps for offshore wind development on the West Coast? And how do you plan to hear from stakeholders like tribes, fisheries, and the maritime industry?
Thank you so much, Mr. Lowenthal. I didn't think you were at the beach, but thank you for clarifying that. Of course, we're very proud of the work that we've been able to advance on offshore wind. You've heard about several of our projects getting off the ground, and it was a pleasure to meet with Governor Newsom recently to announce the 2 areas in the Pacific that could support 4.6 gigawatts of clean energy to power 1.6 million homes. That is an exciting opportunity, and it's wonderful to think about and of course, to work on. So we are always committed to active engagement with stakeholders. We have done that, and we'll continue to do it. We want to make sure that everybody has a voice in how these projects move forward. And of course, happy to also consult with you as well. So if you want us to contact anyone in particular, we're happy to do it. But we feel very confident that we try to do an excellent job at ensuring that voices have a seat at the table.
Thank you, and we will contact you. Secretary Haaland, thank you for your department's work to undo the damage that the last administration did to the Migratory Bird Treaty Act. The reality is the whiplash of how MBTA is interpreted is bad for everyone. Companies don't have certainty about how the government will view the impacts of their 30 to 50-year projects on birds. Birds themselves get unnecessarily killed. I know your department is leading the way on the deployment of renewable energy, as we just spoke about, to address the climate crisis. And I think we have a real opportunity to get both bird conservation and wind energy right from the start. The budget request for the Fish and Wildlife Service includes an extra $18.2 million for migratory bird management. How will those funds help with the responsible deployment of clean energy and the necessary updates to MBTA implementation?
Thank you so much, Congressman. I'll talk briefly, and then I'll hand it to Rachel in case she has anything to add. But right now the Fish and Wildlife Service is reviewing public comments on the proposed rule. And so we'll consider appropriate next steps. We'll move forward on that. And if Rachel has anything to add, I would invite her to.
Thanks so much for the question. I mean, just a couple points. Obviously, migratory bird management is going to include habitat. It's going to include data collection. You're going to have a good handle on how the health of species moving forward. The budget does include additional planning activities for the Fish and Wildlife Service as well, which will help resolve potentially in advance some of the conflicts related to clean energy projects. And we want to make sure that we're, in full compliance with the ESA as we move forward with the president's agenda for clean energy. Thank you.
Thank you, and I look forward to continuing to work with you and the administration on this issue, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields. Thank you, Mr. Lowenthal, and let me recognize Representative Graves. Sir, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madam Secretary, congratulations. Good to see you again. I don't know why you would take that demotion from your previous perch, but congratulations to you. Madam Secretary, do you know how much oil was imported from Russia in May or June of last year to the United States?
Congressman, I don't have that figure at the top of my head.
All right, let me make sure I came out of my mouth correctly. Imported to the United States from Russia. So last May and June, it was none. It was zero. And this was during the Trump administration. Do you know how much has been imported for May and projected to be imported for June from Russia?
I don't have that figure on the top
It
of
was,
my
it was
head.
nearly 6 million barrels for the month of May, and it's projected to be in excess of 7 million barrels for the month of June. Russian oil imported to the United States, and this is under the Biden administration compared to Trump administration. It's very baffling to me to see how we're seeing shutdowns, moratoriums, whatever pauses, whatever term you want to use, for production in the United States whenever it does have a big impact on jobs, economy, and we're increasing our reliance upon economies that I wouldn't consider to be friendly. We're also effectively facilitating the construction of the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, expanding markets for Russian oil by withdrawing the sanctions, President Biden's withdrawal of sanctions on Russian intelligence operatives that are building the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, so very concerning. But I think you probably know where I'm going to go with my question now, and I want to follow up on Mr. Lamborn's question, and as well as Mr. Huffman's. As you know, there was a court case, and I believe it was June 15th. The judge found that that he effectively withdrew the pause on, or the moratorium on oil and gas production. I want to understand, and today is June 23rd. This was a 44-page decision was issued on the 15th. I heard you say in response to Mr. Lambert, as well as verifying Mr. Huffman's comment, that there still is a pause in place, but to me that seems inconsistent with what the judge ordered. So I just want to better understand the current status within the Department of Interior. Is there a pause right now, or is there not?
We are going to follow the decision of the court, and currently the decision is being reviewed by our solicitors department and our department and the Department of Justice, and we're going to abide by that decision.
Has anything changed within the department from when that judge issued the decision to today? Are you beginning to move forward on what is it, 257, lease sale 257? Have you published in the Federal Register?
No, we have not, to my knowledge, published in the Federal Register.
So what's changed since the decision was made?
What has changed? That we're reviewing the decision. We're reviewing the judge's
But it's
decision.
44 pages. I mean, it's not, you have a whole legal team,
Thank
you have
you.
a solicitor's office, you have some very talented people, and it's 44 pages. So I want to understand what's changed. The judge said you can't do that it's illegal. So I'm just trying to understand how things have changed.
Thank you, Congressman. I will be happy to make sure that I get you a detailed answer on your question, and we'll be happy to
I'd
revisit
really
you.
appreciate that. This is very important to me, and I know you know that every time this issue would come up when you served on this committee. Very important. Last question I have for you. Last year in my home state, depending on how you want to count, we had somewhere between 5 and 7 storms that pounded coastal Louisiana, resulting in the loss of life, devastation of communities, economy, wiping out areas, and ecological damages, substantial ecological damages to one of the most ecologically productive areas in the coast of the United States. When you stop energy production, you stop the revenue sharing that under our Constitution in Louisiana is committed to hurricane protection, to flood control, and to restoring the coastal ecosystem. What would you say to those people at home that are going to suffer as a result of this decision to stop energy production and stop the investment in the resiliency of those communities?
Congressman, first I would like to just say how sorry I am. I know there was the losses that your community has suffered, and I'm extremely sorry for the losses that they have suffered in these terrible weather patterns that are happening because of climate change. So I want you to know that production on existing leases continues. As I've mentioned before, there are millions of acres of leases currently that are moving forward. There's over 8,000 permits to drill that aren't being used as of yet, and so we want to make sure that you know that there is production still happening in this country.
Thank you, and I do want to follow up with you, please.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Gentleman yields. Let me recognize the gentleman from Arizona, Representative Gallegos, sir, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. What was happening in the economy last year around May and June of 2020 that may have affected oil demand? Can you think off the top of your head?
Thank you for that question, and I believe it was the pandemic.
Yes. I
Will the
believe
gentleman
a
yield?
total.
I'm
no.
happy to choose another month.
No, I do not. So just to be clear, that probably affected our demand for foreign oil since we essentially shut down the economy, so people weren't going to work, factories weren't going, so just wanted to be clear about that. Madam Chair, thank you, and it's good to see you again. I'm also very grateful that your department has made it a priority to review President Trump's illegal shrinking of Bears Ears National Monument, and I was glad to see that reporting that your department recommended a full restoration of the monument of President Biden. As you know, Bears Ears is a sacred place for indigenous people in the region, and the longer it goes without full protection, the more the land is vulnerable to vandalism, destruction, and extraction. Given the urgency of restoring protections of Bears Ears, can you provide any update on when a decision on this matter will be announced?
Thank you so much for the question, Mr. Gallego. And of course, that is entirely up to the president. It is under the prerogative of the president. The Antiquities Act is something that the president exercises, and so that, of course, would be a question for President Biden, and we will await his decision as well.
Can you describe the tribal consultation your department did during the review process and whether your department has taken into account the tribe's request to expand the monument to their full 1.9 million acre requests?
Thank you very much for the question. And yes, we did. I traveled to Utah and I met with the Bears Ears Intertribal Coalition. We did speak with tribal leaders separately. There were tribal leaders who attended several of our town halls that we had during the time I was in Utah. And so we took the tribal consultation issue very, very seriously. And so I appreciate the question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And we've heard repeated complaints from my colleagues across the aisle about lack of local input into Bears Ears National Monument. Secretary Haaland, can you confirm that you've met with local Utah stakeholders, not just obviously the tribes involved, but actual local Utah stakeholders, the county governments, local governments also, while going through this process?
I absolutely did, yes. We had, I think we had 6 town halls where a number of those elected officials participated, and we welcomed farmers, ranchers, outdoor business owners, folks who owned stores and retail operations, and so we felt we even met with some children who came in. So we felt we had a good overall sense of what the community, what was on their minds.
And then as the former chair of the Subcommittee for Indigenous Peoples, I'm glad to see your budget includes a 28% increase in the funding for the Bureau of Indian Affairs. Can you highlight the importance of this increase in addressing some of Indian country's dire infrastructure needs? What else do you need from Congress to begin to meet these needs?
Thank you so much. I would love to give the floor to Rachel for specific needs, but thank you for raising the issue of infrastructure. That is something that is absolutely important.
Thank you, Madam Secretary, and thank you so much for the question. I mean, I think this budget overall is very strong for tribal programs, and I think we include both infrastructure and programmatic increases. A few things that are worth mentioning within the Bureau of Indian Affairs are the additional commitments to trust natural resource management programs. There's a significant investment for climate resilience and work that would be done with tribes on the ground that are addressing climate needs, including potentially relocation issues. And then we have public safety and justice programs that are also highlighted, which we all know are of need of additional resources, and that includes a 13% increase, including the missing and murdered investments that the Secretary mentioned earlier. It's important to note that the budget maintains investments in public safety construction, in Bureau of Indian Education construction. We are very grateful for the additional resources for BIE schools through the Great American Outdoors Act. And so I think that the overall, the budget includes some balanced investments for Indian country that are well-deserved. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you, Madam Chair. I yield back.
Representative Heiss for your.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Secretary Haaland, again, as you've heard many times today, welcome back and congratulations on your new position. You may remember from the time when you were here that my particular district we're rich in history in this country, and one of the Revolutionary War sites was the Kettle Creek battlefield site, and we are pleased that this past year Kettle Creek was given the status of a National Park Service affiliated site. And I want to thank everyone on this committee, both sides of the aisle, for participating in that action. That is very appropriate, and it was very much welcome in our district. And also for the Department of Interior for the role in that, particularly under the Trump administration while we were working through all those details. I would like to say that since this current administration, our office has reached out a number of times to the Department of Interior to try to finalize the events for Kettle Creek and the presentation of the NPS arrowhead to the site. And unfortunately, to this point, we've had little to no communication with them. And I would like to know if you have any updates, if you have any information on the event or the awarding of the arrowhead for Kettle Creek.
Congressman, on the top of my head, I do not, but I will make sure that I go back this afternoon and ensure that somebody contacts your office and lets you know what the status is on that. And
Okay,
thank you for bringing that up to me today.
Thank you. We really would appreciate that. As
Yes,
you can
of
imagine,
course.
that is a big deal for our district, and particularly those that have worked tirelessly, literally for decades, to get recognition of Kettle Creek. And so I welcome working with your department, and would in advance invite you to be a part of that ceremony when it takes place. We would be honored to have you. With that, if I could transition, looking at the budgetary proposal here, the increase is pretty staggering, 17%. I think that's a significant amount. How in the world are we going to pay for these increases?
Thank you very much for the question, Congressman. And that is a question that I could actually turn over to Rachel, if you can answer that, Rachel.
Certainly. I mean, I think the president's budget includes more than the Interior Department, and so there are some assumptions for revenues and tax policy that are associated with it. I mean, the president has made clear that he views this as a balanced budget that's going to help, a balanced in the sense of a budget that reflects the priorities of the nation and is going to produce the kind of economic growth that is necessary, that will help address some of the needs. So I would say that, I would reflect you back to the bigger budget picture and realize that Interior is just a piece of that, and that we feel that these investments that the president has given us in his budget request are very vital to fulfilling the department's mission.
Well, I understand that, but it doesn't really answer the question of how are we going to pay for any of this, be it the Department of Interior or the broader budget as a whole. And I know there have been proposed tax increases, which will weigh heavily on the American citizen, and I think this, it is only fair that the American people know what's coming and how these type of increases, be it with Interior or any other department, raising such budgets as what is being proposed, it's going to fall on the taxpayer. And we need an honest assessment of that. I would also bring up regarding the Interior portion here, it seems to me that the National Park Service maintenance backlog is not addressed at all in this. I can't find it. Or forest management, as has already been brought up. What are the plans to address those issues?
Thanks for the question. I can take on two pieces of that. With respect to the forest management and the fuels reduction budget, the budget actually does include some increased funding. We have with the Interior Bureaus, we have a $100 million investment that includes forest health programs, fuels management, and burned area restoration that would address some of the treatments that you're describing. And then with respect to the maintenance backlog, the budget does include a 13% increase for the National Park Service overall. We're sustaining investments and drawing on the Great American Outdoors Act that this committee supported, so which has become vital for the department. We have about $1.6 billion across the department that's going to address the deferred maintenance backlog that you mentioned, and is going to make the investments that are going to help us get ahead of that issue in a better way. Thank you.
Gentleman yields. Let me recognize Representative Neguse. Sir, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Secretary Haaland, for being here today. It's wonderful to see you again. We all appreciate your excellent leadership at the Department of the Interior the past few months. As you know, my state of Colorado is home to many beautiful public spaces, including millions of acres that are under the management of your department. I also appreciate you considering the valuable contributions that Coloradans bring to the Bureau of Land Management as you consider the location of the agency's headquarters. As chairman of the subcommittee on the national parks, national forests, and public lands, and as a proud Coloradan, I look forward to continuing to work with you, and again, very grateful for your leadership. As you know, Secretary Haaland, and we've discussed this privately, Colorado has experienced record-setting wildfires in the last year. The East Troublesome and Cameron Peak fires both occurred in my district last year. They are now the first and second largest fires in the entire history of Colorado. The East Troublesome fire resulted in the closure of Rocky Mountain National Park and at one point even jumped the Continental Divide before finally being contained. Wildfire management requires coordination between federal agencies and state and local governments, but the Department of the Interior is primarily responsible for the management of more than 9.6 million acres in Colorado. Department-wide, the fiscal year 22 budget for wildland fire management programs requests $1.44 billion, which includes preparedness, suppression, operations, reserve fund investments, fuels, rehabilitation, and other important programs. I was proud to lead a bipartisan appropriations letter with Representative John Curtis and the Wildfire Caucus, urging increased funding for these programs in this year's budget. And I wonder if you could expound a bit on how the Department of Interior is working with states, tribes, and other partners to leverage these resources and ensure better wildland fire outcomes and post-fire recovery for federally managed lands in Colorado and across the country.
Thank you so much, and I appreciate the question, Congressman. Yes, I mean, now we're not thinking of fire seasons any longer. We're thinking of fire years, because one season just melds right into the other. And if it's anything like it was last year, then we definitely have to. We have a lot to prepare for. So I want you to know that I'm in frequent communication with Secretary Vilsack. We're working together on these issues. We've done joint briefings with the Interagency Fire Center in Boise. And we are working very closely with the Forest Service, with states, with tribes, with local communities. We are making sure that we are all working together. It's the folks on the ground in those states that know their communities far better than we do. We're also working hard to ensure that we are hiring more folks who can be on the front lines. And so we're actively supporting wildfire incidents management teams across several geographic areas. We are doing what we think is everything we should be doing. Of course, we're always welcome or open to conversation and input from this committee, and we would welcome any ideas or anything you would like us to pay particular attention to. But we feel very good about the communications that we're having across the board with those communities.
That's wonderful to hear, Secretary Haaland, and you certainly have a partner in me and in the Bipartisan Wildfire Caucus, and we remain willing and able to help in any way that we can. We've been in touch with Secretary Vilsack as well. In the final minute that I have, I wanted to just briefly touch on another topic that I know you care deeply about, as does President Biden, which is the Climate Conservation Corps, the proposal that he has announced within the American Jobs Act, which, of course, we are very excited about here on Capitol Hill. There's momentum building regarding his plan. We've proposed a similar plan, Civilian Climate Corps proposal for $10 billion of investment to do reforestation and other important critical work on our public lands. And I guess wonder if you might, consistent with the broader subject matter that we've been discussing, touch on whether or not restoring natural fire regimes and conditions, as well as post-fire recovery, could be the type of activity or activities rather that the CCC would participate in if we can get this fully funded here on Capitol Hill.
I appreciate that, and yes, that's one of the initiatives that I'm super excited about. I think it would be a wonderful opportunity to bring folks in as their opportunity to perhaps start a career in conservation. And as I said, we're open to ideas and certainly want to keep these conversations going. I know you are extremely passionate about this issue, and so we'd welcome your input into the ideas that you have. But of course, initially we're thinking these folks are going to restore wetlands on our coastal areas. They're going to remove invasive species. Fuel reduction in forests and so forth. But of course, I think the list can go on.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. We look forward to welcoming you to Colorado. With that, I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Gentleman yields. Representative Radwagen, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Grijalva and Ranking Member Westerman, for holding this hearing today. And thank you, Secretary Haaland, for your testimony. It's good to see you all again in person, and I thank the chairman and ranking member for working to get us back here on the dais safely. We aren't at 100% yet, but we can see the light at the end of the tunnel. And I encourage the American people to take note of their example. If you haven't yet, please get vaccinated and encourage those around you to do the same so we can all enjoy each other's company once again. Before I get into my questions, I also want to thank Secretary Haaland and the administration for including a level funding request for the American Samoa Operations account with OIA. You know, there's been a knee-jerk tendency for the budgeters over the years to include the account in across-the-board cuts, and it remained stagnant through decades of inflation until recently. So I appreciate that you've acknowledged the importance of this account by not touching it. That said, the recent pandemic has highlighted weaknesses in our health infrastructure, and I have a request with the appropriations to not just maintain funding, but to increase the account for development and planning for a desperately needed new hospital. At an Indigenous Peoples Subcommittee hearing last week, we received testimony from several witnesses, including Chairman Ned Norris of the Tohono O'odham Nation, about the state of their healthcare infrastructure, and their descriptions could just as easily apply to the territories as to Indian country. Madam Secretary, I sincerely appreciate your dedication to Indian and insular healthcare issues, and I'll continue to rely on you to help address this problem. Both Congress and the administration need to approach this for both sides, and I look forward to working with you. Shifting gears a bit, not all tribal fee-to-trust applications are the same. Madam Secretary, how will you and your team prioritize and process discretionary fee-to-trust applications? And with what local consultation process will you conduct if there is neighboring tribe or local jurisdiction opposition? And for discretionary off-reservation fee-to-trust applications, will you commit to keeping the Indian Affairs Manual update signed by Assistant Secretary Sweeney last August, which memorialized multiple years of national policy memoranda?
Thank you so much for the question, Mrs. Radewagen. And I appreciate the question. I want to let you know that I had a very nice conversation with Governor Limanu just last week. And so we're in close touch with the folks in your community and just appreciate the opportunity to support you and their mission. The fee to trust applications, we are, I would really appreciate an opportunity if I can get our Assistant Secretary to make sure that we can get a briefing or have a conversation with your staff on this issue, just so you can have all the details you need. It's important to us. And of course, as I mentioned, tribal consultation is an absolute priority of President Biden's administration, and we are committed to that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields. Let me recognize Representative Levin. Sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Haaland, it's wonderful to see you. Just know you are missed here in the House of Representatives. Miss sitting with you, and hopefully you are very proud of two new great representatives from New Mexico who are sitting up here where you used to sit. But it's just great to see you in such a position of influence now. And I want to thank you also for conducting a comprehensive review of the federal oil and gas leasing system and for appearing before members of this committee so we could provide direct feedback on the administration's ongoing review. I think you know that preventing new offshore oil and gas leasing in my state of California is extremely important to me and to the constituents that I represent. The local tourism, recreation, and coastal economies that employ so many of my constituents rely on clean beaches and healthy oceans. And that's why we've co-sponsored the American Coasts and Ocean Protections Act. Under the last administration, as I think you may remember, your predecessor, Secretary Bernhardt, when I asked him, what comfort can you provide me that you will not pursue drilling off the California coast, let's just say he provided no such comfort. And really, it was very clear that fossil fuel interests came first. And it's why we need Congress to permanently protect the Pacific from the dangers of new oil drilling. So, Secretary, I understand that the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management needs to develop a new 5-year leasing program by 2022. So I'll ask you a similar question to what I asked your predecessor. Can you commit here today that you will listen to my constituents in coastal Southern California before making any final decisions about new offshore drilling?
Thank you for the question, Congressman. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, I feel very confident about our team's ability to make sure we are reaching out to stakeholders. That is one thing that we're very committed to. And so, I make that commitment to you that we will ensure that we are reaching out to stakeholders for these issues.
Thank you. Incredibly refreshing to hear that. And can you commit to working with us in Congress as we work to permanently prevent new drilling off California's coast?
I'm always ready and willing to work with you, Congressman.
Thank you so much. I want to turn to smart renewable energy development on public lands. I applaud the administration's desire to achieve 100% carbon pollution-free power on our grid by 2035, and certainly our public lands should be part of that solution. As I talk to some of those who are working on these projects for renewable energy generation on public lands, I've heard that costs like acreage rents often don't reflect fair market value. BLM in California recently adjusted rents in Riverside, San Bernardino, and San Diego counties, but I want to be sure that you're looking at this comprehensively. What action does the department plan to take to address the high costs of rents and fees for wind and solar projects on public lands?
I would love to see if Rachel can answer that question, and of course, we're ready to provide any details on the record.
Thank you so much. We'll look forward to following up. Finally, drought-prone communities that rely heavily on water imported from basins hundreds of miles away are working to enhance local supplies, including by investing in ocean desalination. I have the biggest desal plant in the Western Hemisphere in my district. The American Jobs Plan recognizes the Western drought crisis and the need to maximize the resilience of our land and water resources.
Do you think that an infrastructure package should support a broad portfolio of water supply infrastructure projects, including local solutions like desalination where appropriate?
Thank you for the question, Congressman. And of course, I understand that that is an option. It's one of the tools, as I mentioned, and know that that could be a source of water for coastal communities. And also want to just mention that the American Jobs Plan includes Western water resiliency and desalination, is one of those tools in the toolbox.
Well, thank you so much, Madam Secretary. I look forward to working with you on all of the items we just discussed, and congrats again, and we're so excited for the next few years. Thank you so much, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields. Representative Fulcher, you're recognized for 5 minutes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Madam Secretary, just let me add my name to the congratulations list to you, and also thank you for your demeanor and attitude just in interacting with us and just how you conduct yourself. Thankful for that. Madam Secretary, Representatives Lamborn and Gosa already brought up this topic, but I want to just explore it a little bit further, and it has to do with critical minerals and rare earth elements. And as you know, there are many of those that are needed for homeland security purposes, many of those that are needed just for common consumer use, just to keep our daily lives coherent, if you will. Now, according to the USGS, China currently provides 85 to 95% of our rare earth elements. And that's problematic for a whole host of reasons. They are our enemy, and I know firsthand because I've done business there for years. This is not an entity that generally wants to see the U.S. succeed and prosper. Also, they harvest in a very non-environmentally friendly way when they do that. Now, we have those critical minerals in the U.S., but many of those are on public lands. In my own state, those public lands comprise nearly 2/3 of the landmass, and in our nation, nearly 1/3. But harvesting is prevented for the most part by a preservation type of policy, and that policy just simply doesn't allow it due to regulation or law or lawsuit, et cetera. And therein lies the conflict I want to talk with you about. Recently, the administration put out the 30 by 30 initiative, 30 by 30 report, and it focuses specifically on a conservation policy, which theoretically would allow for some responsible harvesting of things that we need so badly. But in your articulation with America the Beautiful report, your recommendations focus on a preservation type language, which recommends even more wilderness designations, monuments, and so on and so forth, which simply just would not allow for any of that. Please talk to me about that. Are we going to proceed with, in the future, looking at a conservation type approach where you can theoretically responsibly do some of this harvesting, or are we going to go all out and just say, no, this is preservation, we can't touch it at all? Which will it be in your administration, Madam Secretary?
Thank you so much for the question. And I believe the America the Beautiful initiative has emphasized a conservation model, and that conservation model is meant to ensure that we're collaborating with folks, that we are bringing in people. It's voluntary. We want private landowners. We want tribal nations to be a part of the initiative. It is not meant to be any other way. And so I want to assure you that conservation is the word that we use when referring to America the Beautiful. And that includes, and during the time we were writing this review, that my team was writing the review, we consulted with many stakeholders, farmers, ranchers, folks in the outdoor economy. Those voices were all a part of the conversations that we had, and it is truly meant to be a voluntary and collaborative effort.
So in that sense, will you commit within your administration to support a policy that would allow responsible harvesting of the critical minerals and rare earths that we need in this nation?
With respect to critical minerals, of course, we understand that it's important to an innovative economy, and President Biden recognizes the importance of critical minerals for the future of our country. And of course, we want it to be done in an environmentally responsible way with attention paid to ensure that workers are safe, and so forth. We believe very strongly we can support our economy and the environment at the same time.
And I want to try to get one more very quick question in, but let me just close up by just commenting. Madam Secretary, we only have two options. We either get it from someone else or we do it ourselves responsibly. And the someone else is not our friend. And so please just contemplate that. Lastly, before I run out of time, 58,000 acres burned last year. Many of that on our public lands, Department of Interior lands. Do you have any idea what type of upscale will be needed in order to prevent such things from continuing to grow?
Thank you so much for the question. Perhaps that's one that Rachel might be able to
Yes, ma'am.
give some details.
Thank you for the
on.
question. I think you've touched on a really important question. And we go back to the cohesive wildfire strategy, which talks about fire resilient communities and supporting response efforts. And one of the pieces of that is making sure that the land is healthy and that we have the appropriate resources. And so,
Rachel, and I apologize, but I'm out of time. Any of that data that you'd be willing to share in writing, that'd be great. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Yes, sir. Thanks.
Thank you, sir. Gentleman yields. Chair recognizes Representative Porter. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Secretary Haaland, as the chair of the committee's Oversight and Investigations Subcommittee, I take my responsibility to ensure transparency and accountability very seriously. The American people have a right to know how their country's top officials and industry leaders are making policies and decisions that will affect all of our lives. During the last administration, getting answers, much less clear answers, from our government leaders, including and maybe especially those at the Department of the Interior, was no easy task. Out of the committee's more than 40 requests made by Chair Grijalva, Interior adequately responded to less than a quarter of them by the end of the administration. And the vast majority of requests got no response at all or were filled with useless, irrelevant information, often publicly available, hundreds of pages of wingdings, and even a 12,000-page printout of an Excel chart that was completely unreadable. That was a new low, and an attack really on Congress's obligation to perform oversight. Can you commit to being more responsive to Congress than your predecessors under the Trump administration?
Oh, thank you, Congresswoman. We will be as responsive as we possibly can. I do want you to know that currently we are processing oversight requests from the last administration, currently requests from the chairman that were unfulfilled in the previous Congress. So those are still ongoing. And very quickly, want you to know that 7 full committee chairs in the House have written to our department requesting documents pertinent to January 6th. So those are all requests that we have currently that we are working on. And of course, we will continue to keep pursuing opportunities to fulfill every single request that we get.
So you're working to clear the backlog, which was significant, the January 6th related requests. And then can I, from my impression, seeing what's going on, the document requests, are you committed to cooperating in good faith with both parties' requests for information, including requests from the minority party?
Thank you so much for the question, and I understand that when the chairman will send a request, it is a request for the full committee, as far as I understand. But look, we really want to be responsive as we possibly can to this committee, and we will work to hopefully achieve that.
And I appreciate you taking those in order, trying to get us information that is now we've been waiting years for, and proceeding in a good faith manner. I wanted to ask you briefly, Secretary Haaland, you know I have 3 kids, and you too have been a single parent. I wanted to ask you a little bit about the Every Kid Outdoors program. Are you familiar with that?
Yes.
And I noticed that this program doesn't have a specific line item appropriation. Do you know about how much money will be spent administering this program in the proposed 2020 budget?
I will ask Rachel to fill you in on that, but want you to know that one of my deep priorities is making sure that children have access to the outdoors.
And the Every Kid Outdoors program, for people who don't know, provides access to public lands for every fourth grader in this country. And the president has supported this, but I think there's a way in his budget, but I think we can go further and do more to make sure that this program is not just a website, is not just a gimmick, but that we actually are providing the resources for things like transportation and program planning to make sure that kids who live far, far away from national parks, kids in urban areas, are able. So I would just like a commitment that you'll continue to looking into how you can support Every Kid Outdoors.
Yes, yes.
All right, thank you. My last and final question, you know that there are lots of diverse opinions about fossil fuels and the future of fossil fuels. But one area where I hope we can all agree is the importance of protecting taxpayer money. Would you say that you have an obligation as secretary to identify and address waste, fraud, and abuse?
Congresswoman, with respect to our public lands, it is the truth that our public lands belong to every single American, and in that regard, I feel committed to protecting those lands for every single American, even with regard to money issues.
And I know earlier this year you launched a review of onshore oil and gas leasing. Do you know how long onshore oil and gas leasing has been on the high-risk list by the Nonpartisan Government Accountability Office?
Rachel, can you answer that? I'm sorry.
No, it's fine. I think the answer is too long, however long it is.
The answer is, she's a very good student. That would be an A+ answer. The answer is 10 years. And so I really support you doing this review. And undervalued, I mean, for 10 years, we have lost now tens of billions of dollars because we have undervalued oil and gas leases. And so do you believe that reviewing this nonpartisan recommendation to get fair value for taxpayers is partisan?
No, I don't think it's partisan. I think that every single American has a stake in our public lands, and we should protect that right for every single American. So no, it's not partisan at all.
Thank you very much.
Gentlelady yields. Mr. Stauber, sir, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Ranking Member Westerman, for holding this. Secretary Haaland, thank you for joining us today. And I would like to especially thank you for appearing in person. It is well past the time we restore the norm of appearing in person to conduct business in this committee. The Interior Department's budget request includes an increase of just over $26 million for the Mineral Resources Program. This program is crucial to mapping unknown deposits of critical minerals, which is important because, as your request acknowledges, we are over 95% import reliant for 20 of the 35 critical minerals. However, in my district, the Duluth complex features 95% of America's nickel, 88% of America's cobalt, and about 1/3 of America's copper, not to mention the rare earths or the platinum group elements and others. We know where these minerals are. We don't need to map them. In fact, the USGS has more than 55 entries for the Duluth complex alone. And during the campaign, then candidate Biden seemed to acknowledge this issue as well. In fact, as you can see in this Reuters headline from October of 2020, then candidate Biden pledged to use domestic union miners, including those in my district, to help source these minerals. Fast forward to May of 2021, about 2 months after your confirmation, you can see in this Reuters headline that now President Biden's administration plans to look abroad to foreign countries for minerals and no longer use the domestic union members in northern Minnesota. Secretary Haaland, what changed from October of 2020 to May of 2021? And why does the administration no longer plan to use domestic miners to source these critical minerals that follow the best environmental standards and the best labor standards in the world? And we're talking about the Duluth complex, the biggest copper nickel find in North America.
Congressman, thank you so much for the question. And what I can say is that President Biden does support energy independence in our country. We agree that ensuring the availability of critical minerals to the future of our energy needs is very important to America's competitiveness
Madam
and
Secretary,
new technologies.
would you rather source these minerals in our country where we've mapped them? We follow the best EPA, the best labor standards. Wouldn't we want to mine these minerals in the United States rather than source it out to foreign nations?
I truly appreciate your question and your information, Congressman, and of course, we're happy to continue to speak with you about this issue.
We talked about permitting earlier, Madam Secretary. We have one copper nickel mine in its 19th year. The other one is going on 10 years. Yet, just in southern Ontario, there's a gold mine that they put together in 4 years. Same watershed. We can do better. So I support mapping our minerals. We need to know exactly what we are blessed with in this country nationwide. And how can we secure our domestic supply chains? We need to extract these critical minerals from where they are. We need to limit our foreign reliance on child labor and foreign adversaries that don't have our best interests at heart. It does not make sense to transition to alternative sources of energy, depending on foreign nations for these critical minerals that we use in our everyday life, that are a part of our everyday life now. And as we transition, it's important we mine the minerals here in our country. And so I would say by catering to activists, anti-jobs, anti-mining crowd with only 16 days remaining in office, the Obama-Biden administration pulled long-standing mineral leases for Twin Metals, the project in northern Minnesota, to the dismay of bipartisan, bicameral coalition of Minnesota members of Congress and the Iron Range. In May of 2019, the Trump administration rightfully reinstated these leases, providing certainty to a region and its union workers and our nation. Once again, removing these leases would thrust the Iron Range, my constituent, in desperate economic need of jobs. Can you today commit to supporting union jobs and revitalizing northern Minnesota by keeping these long-standing mineral leases in place and not prejudging any outcomes before the environmental review is completed?
Thank you for the question, Congressman. And I don't make a practice of prejudging anything, and we do feel that we have a review process in place that will make sure that...
Although you did sign on to removing 234,000 acres, prejudging.
Thank you, Congressman.
Gentleman
Thank
yields. Gentleman yields.
Back to
Let me
you. Yield back. Thank
recognize Representative Ledger Fernandez. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Chair Grijalva. And Secretary Haaland, I'm so grateful to have you here today. You know how proud the entire state of New Mexico is and how thankful we are for your leadership, your guidance, and your wisdom. And you know, also as a New Mexican, you know that we are in the ground zero of the climate crisis and must act to prevent the never-ending drought in the beautiful place we call home. My colleague from Louisiana pointed out earlier that bigger hurricanes and storms are hitting his district, and we know that climate change is making those storms stronger and more frequent. States like our beloved New Mexico also rely on fossil fuel production for significant sources of revenue, which often go to schools and other important services. According to the Office of Natural Resources Revenue, actually, New Mexico received a little over $700 million in royalties from energy production on federal lands in fiscal year 2020. But we also know that it's a boom and bust industry, and fighting the climate crisis will reduce fossil fuel development. And we're already seeing the market. It's the market itself that is shifting to clean energy because it's simply cheaper. So I'm working on legislation to assist states in this transition, those that rely on fossil fuels. The legislation would decouple the boom and bust federal royalty sharing from state budgets. In lieu of the federal royalties, we'd provide stable annual federal payments to states to replace lost revenues. And finally, we'd make additional transition investments to enable communities to diversify their economy. What do you think, Secretary, about proposals to support states like Louisiana or New Mexico who will lose federal royalty revenue as we accelerate the just transition to a clean energy economy?
Thank you for the question, Congresswoman, excuse me. And I appreciate your thoughtfulness in thinking about how we go about transitioning. We are working hard to make sure that no worker is left behind, and that is a priority of President Biden as well. We know that, and I also understand how important those oil and gas jobs are in a state like ours of New Mexico. So I appreciate your thoughtfulness on this issue. We believe very strongly that a lot of the provisions in the budget that President Biden has moved forward will assist in making sure that definitely no worker is left behind. And I would love for Rachel, if she would like to provide a few more details to you, we would welcome that.
Yeah, I think the major focus would be the reclamation jobs proposal, which is the $16 billion to clean up orphan wells and abandoned mines and put folks to work doing that environmentally necessary work, which I know is something that is a personal priority of yours as well. And so I think that has been one of the focal points. But as the Secretary said, the department's happy to work with you and other members to try to figure out solutions to this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and I do appreciate the support for the orphan wells bill that I've sponsored. But this actually deals, and I'm so glad that we have Secretary Haaland at the helm, because she actually understands closely the impact on the state revenue as well. I also want to ask a question regarding the increase, the significant increase, which we really appreciate, for the Bureau of Indian Affairs and the Bureau of Indian Education in the President's budget request. You know better than most that the needs in Indian country are a trust responsibility. They've been deferred for decades and are therefore significant. We held a hearing in the Subcommittee on Indigenous Peoples last week that detailed the significant needs for construction of new schools, infrastructure, and facilities. Indeed, your Deputy Assistant Secretary Free Haji noted that 86 schools in poor status, and of those 86 schools, 73 do not currently have funding for major replacement or repair projects. Could these school construction needs benefit from the President's jobs plans, which seeks to build much-needed infrastructure?
Absolutely, and thank you. We feel the President's American Jobs Plan can help tribal communities in so many ways, but certainly, yes, the need for schools. And what I'll say is that for the request for BIE's for the Bureau of Indian Education is $1.3 billion, which is $110.6 million over the 2021 enacted level. So we're moving toward where we need to be.
Well, my time is up, but I do appreciate the increased revenues for the BIA, and to address these needed facility improvements. Thank you.
The gentlelady yields. Let me recognize Representative Tiffany, 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, and thank you for being here, Secretary Haaland. The Nonpartisan Congressional Research Service provided a report recently that said of all the lands in the country that are conserved, including federal, state, and private lands, it totals 39% of the land base. How much is enough?
I'm so sorry. Could you repeat that question, please?
How much of that? How much additional land being locked up by the federal government is appropriate?
Are you speaking of the America the Beautiful initiative, Congressman?
I'm referring to public ownership of land.
Well, I'm not quite sure I understand your question, but if you're speaking of the America the Beautiful initiative, that is a collaborative effort, as I have mentioned before, and the land wouldn't actually be locked up.
So have you seen the increase in the price of a 2x4? Are you familiar with what is going on there?
Well, I know that a lot of things have gone up because of the pandemic. Yes, I was aware of the increase in many items.
Yeah, well, the cost of a 2x4 has gone up because of demand, but also it's gone up because of us shutting down lands, especially in the West. I know I recently heard of a story that a mill was shut down in western South Dakota as a result of not being able to harvest on federal lands. What is really a great concern, and I would just highlight that for you.
Thank you.
The gray wolf was just delisted end of 2020 by Fish and Wildlife, and we had a successful wolf hunt in Wisconsin. Do you commit to maintaining that 2020 rule so we continue to have management and protection of gray wolves, and that it be left to the states and tribes?
Thank you for the question, and I appreciate the opportunity to be in contact about this. Of course, our department cares about wildlife. We care about their habitats. We want to make sure that we're working well together with states and local communities.
Are you going to urge your agency to continue to allow states to manage their wolf population rather than going back to the relisting that has been going on?
With respect to anything that is listed under the Endangered Species Act, we rely on science. We're moved by the science, and so I can put it that way. That is the main driver behind.
I really appreciate that you mentioned following the science on this, because there were 26 wildlife scientists back in, I think it was 2013 or 14 in the Great Lakes states, that said that when it was relisted by a federal judge, the gray wolf was relisted by the federal judge, they said it's a terrible mistake because under the Endangered Species Act, it should be delisted. They are recovered. So I sure hope that you will follow the science and continue to allow the states, like my state, Wisconsin, to be able to continue to manage the gray wolf population. Under federal law, it's required to coordinate. I believe it's under NEPA and FLIPMA and some of those major acts. It's a requirement of the federal government to work with local communities, local governments, to coordinate and to have a consistency review with local land use plans. Will you make that a priority of the Department of Interior, that you follow through, your agency follow through with that coordination and consistency review with local units of government?
Congressman, as I have mentioned in many of the questions I've gotten today, we are very good about working with local communities, talking to stakeholders, making sure that we know and understand how communities feel about the issues that we're working on.
So I appreciate that, and you mentioned the word consulting, and consultation is oftentimes used as a term. This is completely different. This is coordination, and it's a specific term that is used in federal law in which you're giving local governments an equal seat at the table so that there is this consistency review with their land use plans and stuff. I hope you will follow through and urge your staff that you're leading, that they do that coordination and that consistency review.
I appreciate that distinction, Congressman. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, is my time up?
Yes.
I yield back.
Thank you very much, sir. Let me recognize Representative Tlaib. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. It's incredibly proud to see a colleague that I came here in a historic class first. We didn't run to become first of anything. We came to represent and fight for the community that raised us. But Secretary Haaland, just seeing you up there, of course, you know how incredibly proud I am. People like us running for office and also representing our country in all different levels. You are surrounded by photos of people that don't look like you, but you care deeply about every single person in our nation. So I just want to thank you so much for your courage to take on this role. Secretary Haaland, you know I come from a community that is considered a frontline community. I want to talk to you about the Environmental Justice for All Act that I proudly co-sponsored and has been led by our chairman, Chairman Grijalva. Some of the provisions of that bill speak to the need to more fully consider what many of my residents call cumulative impacts of multiple sources of pollution in environmental justice communities like mine. I represent one of the most polluted zip codes in Michigan, Secretary. It is where I thought the smell was normal. I thought that it was okay that I smelled like hydrogen sulfide when I went back inside my home playing in the front yard with all my siblings. This neighborhood continues to be surrounded by multiple sources of concentrated pollution that contribute to asthma, respiratory issues, even cancer. In my years of working with environmental justice warriors, they consistently bring this up, the need for cumulative impact analysis and environmental decision-making that is centered on public health. They are sick and tired of corporations and corporate greed really having just a free-for-all of license to pollute their communities. And at the end, it's our country and our communities that suffer the most. So can you speak to why it is important for the Interior and other federal agencies to consider public health impacts when permitting activities in areas that already suffer from multiple pollution sources? Why is that critically important?
Congresswoman, thank you so much for the question, and it's definitely an important one and one that President Biden cares deeply about. And I can tell you that as a citizen of the Pueblo of Laguna, we were home to the largest open pit uranium mine in the world for 30 years, 3 open pit and 9 underground mines. Not only did the blasting break apart homes, traditional homes that had stood for hundreds of years, but people are still dying from that uranium being blown around. It took decades to even get funding to start cleaning it up. And so I understand so well what you're talking about, and I want you to know that I care deeply about the health of our children and why we need to make sure that we're centering the activities that we do on the overall health and welfare and vitality, if you could say, of all of our communities. And I want to point out the Justice 40 initiative that aims to bring 40% of the overall benefits of federal investments to underserved communities like yours. And you mentioned that, yes, you thought it was normal. It isn't normal. Every child should be able to breathe clean air and play outside in a safe environment. So I want you to know that we're committed to that, and I thank you for raising that here today.
No, thank you so much. And of course, I know you get invited to so many different districts and communities, but the 13 district strong community would welcome you. As soon as we implement that 40%, you can come and you can show them that they shouldn't be left behind as we think about clean air and clean water. Lastly, Secretary Haaland, I'm concerned about reports that I've read that detail the past harassment that some BLM staffers have faced from local politicians in their communities that serve in a lack of support from some BLM managers for staffers who are enforcing regulations that ranchers object to. Have you been looking at that and understanding? I mean, this is really harassment and intimidation of BLM staff.
Thank you, Congresswoman. I am committed to the workforce at the Department of the Interior, some of the most dedicated public servants in the entire federal system. I have career staff who have been at the department for over 40 years, and their safety is of the utmost importance to me. So I appreciate the comment. We are actively ensuring that we're following up on any, and we do follow up on any issues that are reported to us, and it is an important part of our overall health of our workforce.
Thank you. And Secretary, please look to this committee as partners, but I also would welcome Chairman Grijalva if we can have a hearing really to expose what's happening to BLM staffers. It's disturbing, and I've seen it done on the state level, and targeting these employees that are trying to protect us is wrong. Thank you. I yield.
Gentlelady yields. Representative Carl, recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Welcome, Madam Secretary, from the great state of Alabama, I might add. Welcome back to your committee. Like most of my colleagues here, I'm very upset about the Biden administration's moratorium on new oil and gas leases. It's been estimated that 24,000 hardworking folks in the great state of Alabama will lose their jobs over the next 4 years because of this short-sighted decision. There are real people we're talking about, and right now their livelihoods are endangered due to this pause. I also want you to know how important the Go Mesa funds are to my district. As a county commissioner, I fully understand the Go Mesa program. The program supports $26 million in conservative and recreation projects in the state in South Alabama last year alone, including shoreline registration, bike trails, park enhancement, and marine science research vessels. Each year, local county commissioners and municipalities, governments plan projects based on forecast of these Go Mesa funds. If the leases continue to be canceled, our coastal communities will be denied a vital source of funding for the years to come. I find it very hypocritical of the Biden administration to preach to us about the environment, but ignore this important component of the offshore drilling called Go Mesa. My good friend, Mr. Graves, brought this up before, but I want to get some clarification. You said the department is reviewing the Louisiana court decision and will comply with its ruling, and that this pause on the new leases is unlawful. Have you directed your staff to research the leases on the sailed 257?
Thank you, Congressman. I would appreciate an opportunity to answer your question, that particular question on the record. What I can say, of course, is that the leasing pause is only on new leases. It does not affect the millions of acres of leased land, nor the over 8,000 permits that are active currently.
But do you anticipate the 257 program coming back in existence this year?
As I mentioned, I would like to answer that question for the record, if that's okay with you. I would appreciate that opportunity.
So you're going to provide that to me in writing?
Yes.
Okay. My other question for you is, we see the department's comprehensive review on oil and gas lease program. When will we see this comprehensive review on oil and gas lease?
Thank you so much for the question. We have stated that it will come early summer, so sometime soon.
July's here. When's early summer to you?
Yes, sometime soon. I think, is this the first day of summer? It'll be soon, Congressman, and thank you for the question.
So as part of the department's review, you have consulted with the state and local officials in Alabama?
I can't answer that question specifically, but I would be happy to find out exactly who we have consulted with and
the old trick in politics is never ask a question you don't know the answer to. The answer to is zero. Your department has had a conversation with no one in the state of Alabama according to the governor's office. So I encourage you to take in consideration getting input from our elected officials that know what's going on the ground. Without our input, I don't see how you can make these rash decisions to shut industries down without knowing what's going on, boots on the ground.
Thank you.
With that said, in your plan, is there a plan to reach out to these local governments? I heard you talk earlier about some children that you dealt with. Did you not do that in Alabama before you shut the leases down?
Thank you, Congressman. We will be happy to follow up with your office on this issue, and if there's someone in particular you would like us to speak with, we'd be happy to do that. We're committed to hearing from everyone, and we have had a number of consultations. We had a forum for the industry back in May, and we have been in contact with hundreds of people, and we'll be happy to be in touch with you as well.
Well, I just find it very hard to comprehend that you'd make such strong decisions on an industry, killing a complete industry, and not have some conversation with local. With that, thank you, sir. Thank you, ma'am.
Let me recognize Representative Case. Sir, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Madam Secretary, aloha. Good to see you. First of all, there's been some overlay in the discussion over the size of the budget for the Department of the Interior. And I just want to say to you and for the record that I completely support the President's budget request. It is inconceivable to me that a department that is responsible to steward 20% of our nation's lands, that manages the water supply for 17 western states, that is responsible for almost 600 federally recognized tribes, that has responsibilities across the board over centuries and now to include climate change, is funded at literally around 1% of our total discretionary budget. And so I don't view the President's budget at somewhere around 1.15% of the discretionary budget, 2.3% of the discretionary non-defense budget is unreasonable. In fact, I believe that the DOI has been chronically underfunded for a long, long time, and we have a lot of catch-up to do. So first of all, back to you on that one. Second, I do want to address two areas that although they don't enter into the national discourse quite as much, are critical areas within your department's jurisdiction. And I speak of Native Hawaiians and of the Compacts of Free Association. First of all, thank you so much for your own recognition of Native Hawaiians as the indigenous peoples of our country who originate in Hawaii. As you know, the Native Hawaiians have a special political relationship and have for over a century now. You kindly joined us on an event relating to Native Hawaiians, and your personal attention and recognition of Native Hawaiians is deeply appreciated. We have work to do with your department on Native Hawaiians. We need to assess whether the Office of Native Hawaiian Relations within the department is functioning correctly for the next century. And you have kindly engaged us on that. We look forward to completing that work with you, along with a number of other initiatives that affect Native Hawaiians that are within your departments. Let me speak directly to the Compacts of Free Association. These are the agreements that our country has with 3 other independent sovereign countries in the Pacific, the Marshall Islands, Micronesia, and Palau. These are compacts under which we both enjoy mutual privileges and obligations. They are key from our country's historical perspective and are certainly our future. And these compacts are up for renegotiation right now. The fact is that the negotiations have apparently bogged down. There is little movement on them. The responsibility within the administration for negotiating these compacts lies with Interior and State. There is little evidence that there is any progress being made on those negotiations. I am joining a number of my colleagues in a letter to the President that will be copied to you very soon, asking that those negotiations be placed on a much faster track. The last time we went through these negotiations, they unfortunately lagged for years, creating critical uncertainty in the Pacific. And so I would simply ask you for any comments you have. I don't expect a formal response from you right now, but I would simply like to commend the issue of the compacts to you personally and to your department as an area that I hope is not forgotten, and certainly we're going to try to highlight it.
Thank you so much, Congressman. And no, definitely not forgotten. And in fact, I've met with a number of governors over the past couple of weeks, and we have very competent and caring people in that office. And I want to assure you that it's a priority for us, and I will take your comments to heart and see how we can move this forward.
Thank you so much. I yield back.
Gentleman yields. Representative Rosendale, recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you so much for joining us, Secretary Haaland. Good to see you. This administration proposes fully funding the Land Water Conservation Fund and the National Parks and Public Lands Legacy Restoration Fund in the fiscal 22 budget. By your comments, I take this means that the administration is fully supportive of these conservation programs. Is that correct?
Yes, Congressman.
while you comment about the existing leases, we know that they have diminishing returns. Any well has diminishing returns. If that's the case, can you explain how will we replace the revenue loss caused by the Biden administration's moratorium on all new oil and gas leases, which jeopardizes the main revenue source of these programs and the longevity of our conservation funding?
Thank you so much for the question, Congressman. And as I have stated, there are still over 8,000 leases, or I'm sorry, 8,000 permits that sit unused. There is there is millions of acres of land in leases that is currently that can be operational. So the pause on the new leases, it's only that, new leases and not any existing leases. There has been ongoing work in the industry since the pause was implemented.
Excuse me, I appreciate that, and no pun intended, but what you're doing is shutting off the pipeline for the future. And anything that we forestall right now that keeps us from doing the research and the development of those resources ends up impacting us later on down the line, which has put us in a position in years past where we've been so dependent upon foreign energy, which is not good for our economy nor our national security. In confirmation hearing, you promised that, and I quote, the ESA should be driven by the science and is appropriate for species to be delisted when they have recovered. A March species status assessment published by the Fish and Wildlife Service concluded that the greater Yellowstone ecosystem and the northern Continental Divide ecosystem populations of the grizzly bear both have high resiliency and have met the criteria for delisting, have both reached and surpassed their target populations. You continue to claim that your administration will, again, in quotes, follow the science. Will you follow the science and move to delist the grizzly bear populations in both of these ecosystems?
Thank you so much for the question. And yes, the ongoing recovery is a remarkable success for the ESA, and we're happy about that. Our implementation, of course, as you mentioned too, will be guided by science and the law.
So will you then move to delist these populations if they have hit their target populations?
I appreciate the question, and it is noted. There are considerable challenges that remain overall with
They have met
the
target populations, Madam Secretary, and both have high resiliency. Will you move to delist these populations?
Thank you.
Just yes or no, really.
I would like to be back in touch with your office on that.
I would appreciate just a simple answer on that. If you have to go back and confer with your office to give us a yes or no. Missing and murdered Indigenous women is a very important issue in Montana, as you are very well aware. We have 7 reservations there. What are you doing to improve the collaboration between the tribes and the federal authorities to improve the investigation and prosecution of these heinous crimes which claim so many of our Native women?
Thank you so much. And our missing and murdered unit that I announced earlier this year is meant to provide leadership and use the full weight of the department to solve these crimes. One of the main priorities of the unit is for the unsolved crimes, but certainly the budget has been increased as well, and we are confident that we'll be able to move forward on that.
And I understand that.
Your
What I'm trying to
concern.
get at is that collaboration, because we have the sovereign tribes and we have the federal government, and I know that we want to solve this, but there is going to have to be some kind of collaboration. So I would really like to get some detail on what we are going to do to try and bring these parties together to work on these issues.
The department has a very strong and experienced Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary of Indian Affairs who knows tribes very well. He's a former tribal president himself, and is working very hard to make sure that he is collaborating with tribal nations on this issue.
Thank you for joining us, and I yield back, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. And let me recognize a new member to the committee and to some extent Congress, Representative Stansberry, who is representing New Mexico's 1st District, and that she retained the district that Madam Secretary represented. Ms. Stansberry?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the ranking member and to all of my colleagues. It's an honor to be able to serve with you here on this committee. And to Secretary Haaland, it's humbling to be here. And I'm getting emotional as I was sitting here listening to you speak. It's so humbling and such an honor to be able to see you serving our nation. New Mexico is so proud. Our country is so proud. You are exactly where you need to be, and you are already bringing the change that our nation needs to see. So thank you for your service and everything that you are doing. When I look at the President's budget, Mr. Chairman, and the request for the Department of the Interior, I feel hope. The American people know that the science is clear and that we must urgently address climate change. I am grateful to see that our budget reflects that, and that if we are going to preserve our planet for future generations, that we address both the causes of climate change and the impacts to our communities, and that we center and lift up our communities in the process. Together, I know that we can build a world that is more just and more equitable and more climate resilient. And this budget actually invests in our communities, in protections for our lands, waters, and wildlife, and in their future, which is exactly what we need to do to ensure our future resilience. As you know, Madam Secretary, our state and our country are facing an unprecedented drought across the West that is heavily impacting New Mexico, that has shattered records already this season, and that is threatening the future of our communities and increased wildfire and drought risks moving forward. Millions of Americans already live without access to clean and safe drinking water, and this crisis disproportionately impacts communities in New Mexico, particularly in our tribal communities. We have to take action now to address the water needs of our communities and climate change and ensure that we are addressing these impacts across our country. I am grateful to see the department's budget allocate significant funding also for public lands, for wildlife mitigation, builds and fortifies our water infrastructure, and supports our communities. I am also, Madam Secretary, deeply proud to see the ways in which this budget reflects our commitment to restorative justice and tribal sovereignty. Secretary Haaland, I've seen your work over the last several months in lifting up the work of missing and murdered Indigenous women, and this week in launching the Federal Indian Boarding School Truth Initiative. These historic steps will begin to address and reconcile our country's brutal history and the need for healing and justice in our country. Thank you for your bravery in bringing these initiatives forward. Madam Secretary, I'm also just so grateful for your service and look forward to working with you in the transformative work that we have to do for our country and our communities. And Mr. Chairman, I would like to just ask Madam Secretary if you could share more with us about your work on missing and murdered Indigenous women and the work that you're hoping to do, as well as the boarding school initiatives that you've launched this week.
Congresswoman, thank you so much for the question. And I want to, and I appreciate your kind words very much. And of course, I am a proud New Mexican sitting here today. I want to sort of emphasize President Biden's commitment to diversity and how important it is that we have diverse voices, those perspectives from folks who generally haven't had a say in a lot of the policy that or the ideas or the work that comes out of the federal government. And so for that, I'm proud to have those opportunities. The missing and murdered Indigenous women has been on my mind for a very long time, and I'm happy that it has achieved some prominence in sort of mainstream issues, right? People don't know to care about something unless they know about it, and so raising the issue time and again helps the public to really coalesce and realize that it's an important issue that all of us should care about. So I appreciate your help on that as well. The boarding school initiative, after I heard the news of the grave in Canada, it made me think about a day that I was sitting with my grandmother and just talking about her experience when the priest gathered up children from around the village and put them on a train to go to Santa Fe. And I know that's an experience that a lot of communities have, and so I'm happy to move those issues forward and appreciate your support on all of those. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Secretary.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you, I yield.
Gentlelady yields. Representative Moore, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chairman, Ranking Member. Secretary Haaland, it's great to see you again. It would have been completely appropriate for you to have deferred my colleague, Mr. Gallego's question to me, whether or not you showed up to hear out people in Utah. I saw your schedule. I was with you for 3 full days. You had a packed schedule and were willing to take input, and it was very much appreciated. Our request for you to visit Utah and that part of the region was sincere, and you showed up, and on behalf of the entire Utah delegation and Utah, where we appreciated your willingness to come and hear out the stakeholders. Bears Ears is a very difficult situation to be able to solve, and your willingness to come was really important. We've made an equally sincere request to President Biden, as you may know, to meet with us before he makes a decision. Do you have any insight as to whether that meeting will happen, or to the extent that it would be worthwhile, productive? Any insight there?
Congressman, thank you so much for the question, and I was very honored to have an opportunity to join you and everyone in Utah. It was a really, really wonderful time. As I mentioned, this is a presidential action. The Antiquities Act is solely within the president's decision-making, and of course, we're happy to make sure that he knows that your request reflected in this hearing today, and I'm happy to let the White House know that you have requested that again.
Yeah, thank you. I remember thinking during our meeting there was so much productive work that we did over those few days. I worried as we came back to Washington, do we all retreat to our corners? And we're all subject to that. I totally get that, and it is a sincere request, and would appreciate a chance to continue this dialogue before any final decisions are made. With respect to the Antiquities Act, there's 2 big factors, and I haven't been involved in this as many other members of Utah stakeholders. You got to meet with our governor. It's been a long, very tumultuous years on going back and forth and the ping pong effect. 2 things stick out to me with the Antiquities Act. One being, the sincere desire to protect the antiquities in the smallest amount of land. That's what the Supreme Court has come out with the ruling of, saying we cannot make these huge, land designations, but we have to use the Antiquities Act as something that will focus on preserving that, and we are committed to that as well. But the second piece is what I'd actually like to discuss briefly, the management decisions that go along with the Antiquities Act. Can you provide any other insight, maybe your willingness to release your monument report, to give the public some assurance that the management, however this is done, will be a first and foremost priority to that?
Thank you so much for the question. And Congressman, during the days that I spent in Utah, I really took those comments to heart. The ranchers who came in and spoke with us and professed their love for the land. I understand that because, I have a family of ranchers as well. I understand how they feel about the land, and I absolutely appreciate that. And so I just want you to know that all those comments did absolutely figure in. And as I've mentioned many times here, our public lands belong to every American, and so we want to make sure that that this beautiful cultural and historical place that can offer so much to future generations stands. It's also important to make sure that those folks in your state who are on the ground can also reap the benefits of being in those lands that they have for generations as well. So all that input was extremely important to me, and I just want you to know that I took that to heart, and it is in some ways reflected in the work that we do.
And finally, with respect of those management decisions, after having that experience, would you deem that to be best handled in an executive fiat or a legislative solution?
Well, as I mentioned, as a former member of Congress, I understand the value in legislation, right? That's what you do, and I wholeheartedly would support your decision to move ahead with any legislation if that's what you choose to do.
Thank you. Many more questions, but I'll yield back.
Gentlemen, yields.
Thank you.
Let me recognize Representative McEachin for any questions you might have. Before that, let me indicate that the Secretary was gracious enough to extend this to when the votes are going to be called, which is about 1:15 or so. And so if we can, for the people that are left, and there's still quite a few, we can be as concise and allow every member to have an opportunity. I would appreciate it, but it's your 5 minutes. So, Mr. McEachin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And again, as always, I thank you for the opportunity to participate in these hearings in this very important matter. Secretary Haaland, it's great to see you again. And I'll try to cut straight to the chase. Earlier, one of the members raised the issue of cumulative effects in the Environmental Justice Act. I mean the EJ for All Act. That I've been proud to ride side saddle with the chairman on. This may end up being more of a comment than a question, but the notion of benefits came up in the Justice 40 initiative. And I need you to understand, Madam Secretary, that in my viewpoint at least, the chair and I worked for a couple of years trying to figure out how best to serve these underserved communities. And the feedback that we got back was that we know the underserved communities, we're all different. We share some commonalities in that we've been disenfranchised, that we've been marginalized, that we're frontliners, but we have different problems that call for different solutions that prevents Washington from being able to do one size fits all. And that's what, to me, ought to be so exciting about the Justice 40 initiative. But the question is what do we mean by benefits? And I'll be talking to Cecilia Martinez later on, hopefully this week, about that definition, because I know it's still being worked out. But benefits have to be done at the direction of the stakeholders. Washington can't come in and say, we're going to fix this water line, you're going to benefit from it, be happy. That's what we've historically done. I hope, and I don't have any doubt about the president's commitment to being a true EJ advocate. He has lifted that notion up so well and so in such a forceful fashion that I don't have any doubt where his heart is. But a lot of the challenges will be in the details, and to the extent that we need to resist the temptation to tell these communities what's in their best interest. Rather, we need to support them with resources, expertise, or whatever else they need so that they can implement their own solutions. So I just wanted to put that out there because I know that you're going to be part of that discussion about what benefits means. If you care to comment on it, fine. If not, I'll just move on.
I'll thank you, Congressman, for that and appreciate your stance. And of course, all of that is very important to us.
Well, you know, Madam Secretary, a few weeks ago, Cory Booker and I introduced the Environmental Justice Legacy Pollution Cleanup Act. legislation which would invest $20 billion to clean up legacy pollution that disproportionately affects environmental justice communities. Of that, my bill provides about $10 billion to the Abandoned Mine Land Fund to help fund the cleanup and reclamation of thousands of abandoned mine land sites across the country that threaten the health and safety of local communities. Do you have a moment to speak to the benefits of that sort of legislation to clean up lands impacted by coal mining? And how would this benefit EJ communities? And what can be done with that level of funding?
Thank you for the question, Congressman. And of course, the idea of cleaning up abandoned mines is one that we know could benefit the health and safety of folks in those communities, but it also creates jobs. We feel very confident that no community should be left behind in any transition that we are moving to in this country. And we are committed to creating those jobs so that those communities can continue to thrive. So yes, the environmental and safety issue is absolutely important. The creation of jobs is absolutely important.
Thank you so much for that answer. In the President's FY22 budget, the Interior Department is, whoops, I'm down to 30 seconds. You know what? I'm gonna give those back to my chairman. Mr. Chair, I yield.
Much appreciated. And Representative Harold, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and glad to see you here, Secretary. Thank you for everything you're doing. I'll just be quick about this because there's so many questions to ask, but just kind of following up on Congressman Lamborn and Graves earlier with the recent preliminary injunction to the pause the sale of the new oil and gas leases on federal lands. Can you give the committee a definitive date when the lease sales in New Mexico or other gas and oil producing states will once again be held? And I know this is probably coming from every person that has energy in their state.
Thank you so much, Congresswoman, and I know this issue is important to you as well. We'd be happy to. I mean, as I mentioned, the review's done early summer. It's early summer, and so I think it's coming out very soon. We're complying with the court's decision. They're reviewing it now. I know there's a lot going on in this space, and you want some definitive answers, and we'll be happy when we can give you those.
Okay, and I know you said you had a $17.6 billion budget, and you may have said this, I might have missed it. How much money do you have allocated in the budget for mitigating the orphan wells? And you may have said it, like I said, I might have missed
I may
that one.
have also, and I think Rachel can speak to that.
Certainly. We have a proposal for a new energy community revitalization program that includes both abandoned mines and orphan wells. And so that is resources for both the federal side and for states and tribes to apply for grants. And that's $169 million that's new this year. And that would complement the larger $16 billion proposal in the jobs plan.
Excellent. Okay, thank you. And then just kind of going back for the energy, I know that in addition to the leasing moratorium, the department has issued us the secretarial order that required BLM field offices to get clearance from political appointees in D.C. in order to approve critical permits like authorizations to drill and right-of-ways. And now the BLM website appears, though, to have missing authorization. And so my question, and kind of going off what Congresswoman Porter said earlier in terms of transparency, will you commit to releasing monthly APD reports so we can evaluate progress going forward?
I appreciate that question, and I would really just like to give you that on the record, if I may. Sure. I will check with the staff in that office and just make sure before I answer you.
Okay, thank you, Madam Secretary. So we can, hopefully they'll get that updated so that we can actually watch that, that real time and follow what the progress is. And then I understand that we have more public lands in the western states, 50% of them or greater. What I want to know is, do you believe every American, whether they live in or near the public lands as we know them in the West, benefit from beneficial use such as ag, oil, gas, recreation, from our public lands?
Well, I think that every American should benefit from our public lands, and that includes communities, whether they're kids in the inner city or rural kids who I mean, we believe that everyone should have access, that they should be able to enjoy the outdoors.
Right. So I believe that everybody in America benefits from fossil fuels, from timber, from agriculture, from eating. I mean, everything we produce on public land. So I just think you're right, but we've got to also ensure that we're protecting the industries associated with public lands. But I just want to finish up with, I'm a little bit jealous that my colleague from Utah had a visit with you in Utah for several days. So I would like for you to come to CD2 so we can meet and look at our public lands, our operations in the district, and have a really meaningful conversation about that as well. So thank you, Madam Secretary, and I yield back.
Thank you, Congresswoman.
Gentlelady yields. Representative San Nicolas, you're recognized.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman and Madam Secretary. Good day to you. When President Biden historically mentioned states, tribes, and territories in his inaugural address, I thought that was a real high point for the efforts of our territories in particular to seek greater support from the administration. And I was only more pleasantly surprised to find his nominee to be you, Madam Secretary, someone who fully understands the struggles of indigenous communities, of marginalized communities. And with that, there is just so much hope and aspiration represented in you serving in this capacity, and further represented in the sentiments expressed by the President in his inaugural address, and further reinforced in his nomination of you as our Secretary of the Interior. We are so happy to have you, Madam Secretary. I wanted to specifically discuss in the President's budget and echo the sentiments of my colleague, Mr. Case, the concerns of the territories with respect to the compacts of free association. These compacts, of course, are needing to have their negotiations reinitiated and concluded in earnest. But more specifically, Madam Secretary, there is a concern with respect to the host communities impacted by these compact negotiations. Specific to my territory, and no doubt similar to other host communities like Hawaii and even the state of Arkansas, the compacts of free association allow for our treaty allies to be able to migrate to our country with the intent of seeking out education, healthcare, and job opportunities. And we welcome those as partners in the treaty that the United States engages in with these particular countries who are strong allies of this nation and strategic allies given their specific geographic location and their long history with the United States and with their neighboring regions such as Guam. But Madam Secretary, when I evaluate the President's budget, I am very heartened to see, of course, a dramatic increase in the resources provided for our Indigenous brothers and sisters in the Bureau of Indian Affairs. But specifically to our territories, the increase in the President's budget request does not adequately reflect the impact of the compact treaties on the host communities. When I broke it down on a per dollar basis in the 116th Congress, Madam Secretary, it came out to about $800 in support provided to the territory of Guam for us hosting our treaty allies and those who decide to migrate to Guam and call Guam home. Unfortunately, of course, the cost to educate far exceeds an $800 balance. The cost to be able to provide healthcare services far exceeds the $800 balance, to include the recent extension of this Congress for COFA migrants to be able to avail of Medicaid as a benefit. And so I wanted to inquire if there is a plan in the Department of Interior to recognize the true costs of our responsibilities of hosting our compact guests. And if we can look forward to those true costs realizing in the actual financial support that's afforded in the budgetary requests that is maybe proposed in this round or perhaps proposed in a future round.
Congressman, thank you so much for the question, and we understand the issue, and we appreciate you coming to us with this issue today. I wonder if Rachel can perhaps add some detail, the kind of detail that you are looking for. Thank you.
Sure. I know, thank you so much for the question. I know that this has been a priority for a number of states and territories over the years. The budgeting, as you know, there's two sources of funding. There's some mandatory funding, but there's also discretionary money in the budget request. We were happy to support a level funding for Compact Impact. I think it's $4 million in the President's discretionary request. And of course, we will be happy to work with you going forward on this.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to just make it very plain that if the administration puts forward a budgetary request that reflects the true cost, we will absolutely, as host communities, be fully supportive of that. Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman and Madam Secretary.
Gentleman yields. Representative Boebert, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Grijalva and Ranking Member Westerman, for holding this important hearing. And thank you, Secretary Haaland, for attending today. Appreciate your presence here. And I appreciate in your opening statement that you said that you would like to work together. I do believe and agree with you that we can accomplish great things when we work together. And I love that you highlighted just the good paying jobs that come from what we can do together. Secretary Haaland, as you know, Colorado and many states in the West are experiencing a very severe drought. You sort of danced around it earlier, but why does this administration not have any investments in water storage in your budget?
Thank you very much for the question, Congresswoman. And as I mentioned, water storage is one of many of the tools that our team believes can help so many of the states that are experiencing the drought through the drought. And I appreciate your support of that, and we'll absolutely take a look at it.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. And yes, you did. I agree that it is a tool for drought mitigation. You also said yes that you support the reauthorization of the WIN Act when questioned by Representative McClintock. And to confirm, if you support the reauthorization of the WIN Act and water storage as a tool, then you also would support the reauthorization of the expiring subtitle J of the WIN Act related to water storage. I just didn't see the reauthorization of expiring subtitle J of the WIN Act, which has successfully funded water storage in your budget. So is that correct? You support that?
Congresswoman, thank you so much for the question. And what I should have said is that extending the WIN Act, of course, it's a decision of Congress. Congress is you make that decision, and we are aware of the different proposals in Congress.
Reclaiming my time. Thank you, Madam Secretary. The Trump administration funded water storage, water recycling, and desalination projects throughout the West, and I encourage the DOI really get their priorities straight instead of pandering to radicals that want to tear down dams and prevent water storage projects. So I am happy to hear that you're in favor of water storage. It's something we've battled in Colorado for quite some time. Madam Secretary, the previous administration, moving along, including career officials currently within your agency, relocated the Bureau of Land Management headquarters from Washington, D.C. to my district in Grand Junction, Colorado. Following a competitive process, the relocation has a strong support from Colorado's Democrat governor, our 2 Democrat senators, the entire Colorado delegation, and stakeholders on both sides of the aisle. I very much appreciate Mr. Negus's statements and acknowledgement today of the contributions Colorado's received from the BLM and the headquarters during his time today. The move west has reduced the number of long cross-country flights, about 7 hours, I would know, and it has improved training, has delegated more responsibility to employees in the field, improved customer service and coordination with local communities, ensured better decisions earlier in the decision-making process, reduced commute times for the employees, provided good-paying jobs, local jobs, as you said you support, and it will save the taxpayers money. Your budget notes the Biden administration is actively reviewing the 2019 reorganization of the BLM. Do you plan on visiting the Grand Junction BLM headquarters? I have sent you a letter on March 15th requesting you visit Grand Junction, Colorado to see the headquarters yourself.
Congresswoman, I have actually, yes, had invitations from your two senators as well as Congressman Neguse. So I appreciate the invitation, and of course, we're looking at my schedule.
Will you commit here today to keeping the BLM headquarters in Grand Junction, yes or no?
We are actually doing a review on that currently.
The previous administration estimated considerable savings from the Bureau from the move west starting in fiscal year 24. They also found the Bureau's relocation costs $17.9 million. Given these costs, and any move back east would exceed those costs of $17.9 million, that there is no longer a BLM office in D.C. to move back to, that D.C. real estate is much more expensive, and there is a lease on the building in Grand Junction, and the Bureau has hired and moved numerous employees related to 200 plus now Western positions. How would you justify a move back to D.C. to taxpayers?
As I mentioned, Congresswoman, this process is in review currently.
Gentlelady yields. Let me, before our time is up, recognize myself. I know there's 4 other members, and hopefully we'll have the time. I'll be very quick. Today we talked about public assets, and I want to associate myself with the comments Ms. Stanberry made regarding climate change and how it's central to the whole discussion that we're having about this jurisdiction that the committee has with regard to Interior. I think the points that you made, Madam Secretary, regarding indigenous people and tribes and the redefinition of what that relationship has been in the past with Interior is very important. I think tribes and indigenous folk are ahead of us in terms of how they see sovereignty, how they see self-determination, and how they see the trust responsibility, and I think it's imperative that we catch up. We talked about the pause, and it might not be part of the review in terms of oil and gas and extraction policy, but you mentioned it a couple of times in response to other questions, and it had to do with the fact that unused leases that have been there for years upon years upon years, acreage that they are encumbering, and many of those leases being in areas in which there is no environmental detriment surrounding the areas. Because I disagree with some people that everything should be wide open. I don't think you should be drilling and extracting on the rim of the Grand Canyon, period. I don't think you should be drilling and extracting in Yellowstone. But my point being that I think that information would be important for the committee to have so you can make a comparison as to how long those leases have laid fallow and not been used. And maybe it's time for this committee to consider a policy and legislation having to deal with, you either use it during a period of time or you lose it. And this going on in perpetuity and basically speculating and holding areas that I think is wrong. We talked about the BLM, and I appreciate the review that's going on. Some of us opposed that move, and I was one of them. But the fact that the review is going on, I'm more than comfortable waiting for the results of that. You know, once it gets set in, it's more difficult to undo, and I realize that. But that was a decision made, I think, not for cost-saving or administrative purposes as it was for different reasons that we're probably never really going to understand. The other thing is the previous administration. It was mentioned constantly, and Ms. Porter mentioned it. We asked for information, didn't get it. And I'm pleasantly surprised at the insistence of my colleagues on both sides of the aisle, and particularly in the minority, wanting this information now from Interior. And your commitment to disclosure and public information for all. That is a market day-night change from what majority had to endure over the last 2 years in terms of access to Interior. So I appreciate that, and keeping that commitment is important. The last issue is the Colorado River. We talked about the drought, that important ecosystem, the critical water source for 40 million people, including for 68 tribes within that region, and it's the critical resource. The drought contingency plan was put together, and I'm pleased that the Interior Department is ensuring tribes of their role in that discussion. That's the feedback from tribes that I've received. But I want to say that I think that post the 2026, when we would revisit this, I think the urgency is now to convene, and that those states that that need to convene in that basin should be doing it now, and looking at their own internal policies, their own water use regulations that they have within their states, because that affects whatever we try to do in terms of the asset that you have jurisdiction over, which is the Colorado River. Those are just requests, but I think that it can't be the same anymore. Other changes have to occur in order to deal with this drought, and at least my experience from the state of Arizona, they don't seem to be ready for it. And I think the government can, your Interior can help spur that discussion, which is not happening at this point. And with that, I recognize Mr. Obernaut for your time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman and Secretary Haaland. Congratulations on the new position. I represent one of the largest congressional districts in the country, and over 90% of the land of my district is public lands of one form or another, many of which are managed underneath your department. So I'm very happy to see you taking aggressive action in your new role. I'd like to ask a couple of questions about the budget that you have presented, in particular as it relates to the Great American Outdoors Act funding. So that, as I'm sure you're aware, it's $1.9 million a year billion dollars a year that Congress has appropriated for the purposes of improving and developing infrastructure on those public lands. I was a little disappointed in looking at the budget that you're presenting today to realize that very little of that funding is being spent recreationally to improve access to our public lands. In fact, by my count, only about 7 projects are being proposed for funding that are recreational projects, which is only about 11% of the total funding. So can you explain the department's philosophy when it comes to appropriating that money and why more of that money has not been prioritized for recreational uses?
I appreciate the question, and I'll give it a try, and then perhaps Rachel may be able to fill in a little bit. But we are. I know that the deferred maintenance there's a very big backlog of deferred maintenance, and that is where a lot of work is being done, or we know that needs to be done using GAOA funding, and we're grateful for it. I supported it when I was a member of Congress as well. And so the deferred maintenance backlog is large, and that's something that we are working to remedy.
Thanks so much for the question. I would say in terms of the access for the projects, recreation is one of the factors that goes in. As the Secretary mentioned, deferred maintenance is and sort of buying down some of these large projects that are on the books that are creating challenges for park visitors and safety issues is a huge priority. For access, we do have a number of roads projects in terms of allowing people to come into public lands. I would note that one of the highest priority projects is a Yellowstone River Bridge project, which is going to help support one of the main arteries to the park that brings visitors there.
Each bureau does things a little bit differently, but I think we are certainly open to working with Congress and making sure that we're implementing the law as intended as we allocate funds going forward, and know that Congress has a role also in helping select the projects. So thank you for the question.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And while we're talking about deferred maintenance, that's what I'd like to ask a second question about, because among the facilities that I represent are the Mojave National Preserve and the Joshua Tree National Park. And as I'm sure you're aware, both of those facilities have enormous deferred maintenance problems. And I can tell you from firsthand experience, having seen them, how desperate that need is. In the Mojave National Preserve, it's nearly $120 billion. Joshua Tree, which is, as you know, one of the most visited national parks in our entire system, the deferred maintenance need is over $60 million. So I'm hoping that I can get your commitment that to help us address those deferred maintenance issues, because neither of those facilities was awarded any project funding in the first 2 rounds of the Great American Outdoors Act funding, and so I'm hoping we can fix that.
Thank you, Congressman. That's very well noted. I appreciate knowing about that. Thank you.
All right, will you work with us to try and help that?
I will be happy to work with you, and we'll see what we can do.
Well, I appreciate it. Well, we want to be a resource to you. I want to congratulate you on your new role and encourage you to come back and visit us often here at the Natural Resources Committee.
Thank you so much. And I have had an opportunity to visit Joshua Tree, and it is indeed a beautiful area, and happy that you have a strong passion for it. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. I yield back, Mr. Chair.
Let me recognize the gentlelady from Minnesota, Ms. McCollum. Representative, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Secretary Haaland, it is so wonderful to see you in person. And I have a couple of questions, but I cannot go any farther without just holding this up. This is a bottle of water. Water is a natural resource. Without water, our lives don't exist. And sometimes water's in competition with oil and gas, and in Minnesota right now, it's in competition with some natural resources. So I appreciate the Department of Interior and the Forest Service doing what it needs to do to make sure we protect water for future generations. So thank you for your work on that. Superior National Forest, in and of itself, is 20% of the clean water that our federal government's responsible for protecting. Honoring our trust and treaty obligations is so very important, and I know that you will do everything in your power to make sure that the federal government does a better job of leading up to protecting the trust and treaty responsibilities in Indian country. And I commend you for what you're setting up with the Federal Indian School Board review. What has just happened to the First Nations in Canada with the discovery of 200 skeletons at one of their boarding schools just was heartbreaking, very heartbreaking. And they've done a reconciliation. They've done a review. They've gone to the public. They've heard the testimony from their tribal communities. We still haven't done that here. So thank you for your work on that. I want to focus for a moment on the proposed increase for Indian Affairs. I'm so excited about the 29%. I know it'll just be a couple of drops in the bucket for you, but it's huge. So congratulations to you and to the President for doing that. Years ago, I was happy to work on the Twahi Initiative. It's a holistic approach that empowers tribal nations to improve health and well-being of families in Indian country and their communities. One of the tribes that was one of the 6 pilot projects was Red Lake Nation in Minnesota. They used their funding to empower, reunite families, work on substance and abuse and recidivism. They worked to reduce suicide, which at the time when that initiative was going through was an all-time high for Native American youth. And Red Lake and the other pilot communities, they produced a report to Congress recommending that Twahi be established as a permanent program. That means that it's going to need authorization, and I hope I have the honor to work on that. They've also committed a new approach to evaluate impacts. Could you tell me what steps the department is taking in collaboration with these pilot tribes to learn about how they use the initiative to build an effective, coordinated, culturally valid models to service delivery to support the well-being of Native American families? And do you know if when we might here in Congress see the BIA's own evaluation of the program?
Congresswoman, thank you so much for the question, and just thank you for your commitment to Indian tribes for as long as you have. It's very much appreciated, and I hope you have an opportunity to visit with Brian Newland, our Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary for Indian Affairs. I think that he has a heart for all of these things. One of the most important things, aside from tribal consultation, is of course taking into consideration there's 574 federally recognized tribes in our country. They're all different. None of them are the same. They all have various issues that concern their tribes, and we really want to make sure that we are getting to the heart of what it is that those individual tribes need. So I can assure you that that those particular geographic areas and other tribal community customs and traditions all figure into how we're moving forward with programs, with all the programs within the BIA.
Well, thank you. We look forward to doing that. We look forward on the Appropriations Committee of Interior working with you to advance our trust and treaty responsibilities. And with that, please, I know it's in your heart, protect our water.
Thank you.
Let me recognize Representative Bentz. You're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Madam Secretary, for your patience with all of us today. And thank you for taking the time to talk with us a month or so, 2 months ago, regarding the challenge we faced down in the Klamath. And I understand that issue has already been raised earlier this afternoon, and I'm appreciative of that. In April, the administration announced the creation of an interagency working group to address the worsening drought conditions in the West and support farmers, tribes, and communities impacted by water shortages. I can assure you, and I know you know this, but right now things are incredibly grim in that basin. And with silence from the administration comes increased frustration, which we absolutely want to avoid, given the incredible challenges they face. And by they, I mean all of the groups in the basin. I know you're aware of this, but I would like to know if that working group has been formed and if it has met. And if not, when can we anticipate that that group will visit that basin?
Congressman, thank you so much for the question, and thank you again also for your accessibility to my staff, your input, and all of that has been extremely beneficial, and we appreciate that very much. I know how important this issue is to you. We want to make sure that we will be in touch with you as this working group moves forward. And as soon as we're able to meet, we will absolutely make sure that we reach out to you.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. I would just say that the challenge there is that there is a lake full of water and it has been allocated to in-stream purposes. So as those who would have normally had that water drive by that lake, you can imagine what their feelings are. And there's 350,000 acre feet of water there, but they can't touch it. And so the administration stepping in after it had made the decision to make those allocations to in-stream purposes, which I understand the ESA is a law. But you folks need to be down there to, and I know the Bureau has tried to be visible, but a higher level involvement is really necessary. And I'm emphasizing this because it's really important. And so I'm going to shift away from that for just a minute, but not because I don't think it's important, but because I just want to use a few moments to ask how the efforts to find some additional money for all of those affected in the basin are going. I just want to say the losses in the basin are calculated to be around $400 million. And we, Doug LaMalfa and I, are asking for a bill of a fraction of that. And we have also asked that the tribes and other folks join us in that bill. Perhaps you can share with us what the administration is doing when it comes to additional funding for that basin.
Thank you so much for the question. And you may know this, but Reclamation committed $15 million in immediate aid through the Klamath Project Drought Response Agency. And then there's another $3 million in technical assistance to tribes for ecosystem activities. I know the community is asking for more help, and we are looking to do more and leverage additional resources as well as the USDA. And I appreciate your deep concern, and thank you for letting us know that you would like folks to come and visit. I appreciate that.
Thank you, Madam Secretary, and thanks for your patience today. I yield back.
Madam Secretary, and Mr. Bentz was the last member to ask questions. Other members, but in deference and an appreciation for your courtesy, Madam Secretary, and for extending your time here, and everybody that was present here, having an opportunity to have a conversation with you, it's very much appreciated. And I, for one, am very optimistic, and not just in a hopeful way. I'm very optimistic of the capacity that you bring to Interior, and the number of initiatives and firsts that we're going to see coming from Interior. That's your record as you've progressed, both politically and in civic life, and I don't see it changing any bit, and that's why my optimism continues to be very high, and it will continue to be that way. And I appreciate your time. Thank you. Meeting's adjourned. Huh?